Ruvia woke up because she started coughing very loudly. The girl didn't understand what was happening and why she was now on the floor. It seemed like this was her 54th life. She climbed onto the bed and sighed. She is very tired of everything. She will live this life like a lazy person. Ruvia decided that she would just rest all the time and do nothing. But suddenly, a woman burst into her room, outraged that the girl had only just woken up. The woman said that Ruvia was as useless as her mother, and weak to boot. The girl hasn't even had time to recharge yet, and she's already listening to lectures. The stepmother started screaming that she should come to her senses and finally get up, and not blink her eyes. The lady believed that the girl had problems with her head due to the fever, but the girl told her to shut up, and the woman was completely horrified. This is Ruvia de Grandiella Ruxen. She is 18 years old and died of a fever. She was the princess of the Duchy of Ruxen. Princess is not the best status for a lazy life. Moreover, in everyday life, she was ignored by the servants. The heartless stepmother and ruthless brother were also present. Selfish younger sister and indifferent father. She has a simply amazing family. The woman continued to scream and ask why she was treating her like this. The main character thought that it would be difficult, but she could handle it. The stepmother continued to shout and ask what kind of tone Ruvia was using. She couldn't accept the fact that the girl was bragging about her bad blood in this way. Perhaps she should punish the girl properly so that she would come to her senses. The main character remembered that it was most likely the Archduke's wife, Margaret, who was also the girl's stepmother. So the girl asked for forgiveness and said that she had just woken up and therefore had not yet come to her senses. If the mistress has finished, the girl will ask her to leave. But if she had anything left to say, Ruvia would still tell her to leave. It's all because the girl is very tired and won't be receiving guests now. The stepmother was simply furious. She did not understand how this girl could continue to be so insolent to her. But Ruvia looked at the woman in such a way that she even became frightened. For such a pampered aristocrat, her words would be an excessive pressure. It would be desirable for her to get scared and simply leave. The woman turned around and told her to get ready because she would definitely punish her for such antics. After that, she turned around and began to leave, slamming the door behind her. Perhaps the main character went a bit overboard. But no worries, everything will resolve itself. Then the main character decided to go to the mirror and look at her appearance. Shiny silver hair and eyes like precious stones. She is very beautiful, as befits a princess. But being too attractive is also tiring. A princess title, a ruined family, a pretty face. None of this suggests a lazy life. A more comfortable option would be to be rejected by a nobleman. She's been through this before, so she knows what it's like. After this, Ruvia sighed and lay down on the sofa. She hadn't chatted so freely for a long time. After that, she was startled by the fact that someone had broken into her place again. It was some guy who was asking if everything his mother said was true. She thought he was some kind of bore. He didn't even look very good. This is Marquis Sven. He is her brother from another mother, the eldest son of the Grand Archduke Rusan. This stepmother simply brought reinforcements and is standing behind, blazing with anger. It seems the girl started hallucinating due to fatigue, and she saw this guy with a dog in his arms. The man demanded that she answer, because his mother had told him about her outrageous behavior. The main character sighed. She really wanted to rest already. They are all very annoying and there is no end to it. She needs to end this conversation, and as quickly as possible. Therefore, the girl replied that everything was correct and she had behaved rudely towards a person who calls herself a mother. Ruvia also noticed that the first thing this woman did was reproach and taunt her daughter for almost dying from a fever. The brother began to say that she was simply going too far, and that perhaps her mother's words had upset her, but there was no malicious intent in them. Ruvia, with a serious face, noted that she wanted to ask something. She asked again whether his lectures were really out of love for his younger sister, or whether he wanted her to show respect to family members no matter what. Her brother was simply horrified. He didn't know what to answer. He was completely speechless from such a question. He would either realize he was being unfair to his sick sister, or acknowledge the fact that his biological mother had been overly harsh. The boy noted that either way, she was wrong and should apologize to his mother. The girl said apple because she wanted to make a play on words. Apology and apple are the same word in Korean. The woman was simply horrified and asked again what it meant. The girl replied that she would give her an apple, so there was no need to sulk. Since she liked them so much, she could go and eat as many as she wanted. After this, there was silence. The brother asked Ruvia again what was wrong with her behavior. For the sister replied that she did not think that she was wrong in anything. Apples are very healthy. Eating one a day is enough to avoid getting seriously ill. Ruvia also remarked that she knew what she was talking about. Apples were very healthy. Her brother was simply furious. He bit his teeth and told his mother that they thought it was time. The woman was outraged. She did not understand why he was not doing anything. The guy tried to take her, and the woman said that since he was sure of it, she would listen to him. They slammed the door behind them. In principle, the guy wasn't that stupid, since he realized that he had to leave when there was no chance of winning. After this, Ruvia decided to lie down on the bed again. Now she could sleep peacefully. When she slept, she had a dream that she had not seen for a long time. She even cried because of it. She asked the maid to bring her something, but then she realized, 53rd farewell, I still can't get used to parting with those she loved. She needs something to eat. Food is the best medicine for sadness. When she went out, she heard the maids gossiping. She asked for food, medium rare meat. If there is wine, then you also need to bring it, and it is preferable that it be from the Dorpt winery, Livian variety. The maids looked at her askance. Ruvia asked again why they were standing there and ordered that they be brought immediately. The maid informed the lady that the time for serving dishes was over, there was no more food, and the other women began to laugh. Ruvia told them to get ready in that case because she could wait. The maid was in complete confusion and already asked herself again what she had just heard. The lady repeated that she had told her to cook since there was no food. The maid sighed and remarked that she was nothing but trouble. She turned around and said that she would serve food immediately. As Ruvia sat at the table, she saw the other maids whispering among themselves. This problem cannot be solved quickly. This girl was constantly bullied. Well, she decided to forget about it because she needed to eat first, but suddenly a bowl of food landed on her table. Everything spilled everywhere and splashed the lady. The maid replied that this was the only thing left and that I wish you bon appetit. The lady asked again if she really had nothing more to say. The maid remarked that next time she should try to arrive on time. They can't constantly adjust to her. Ruvia got up from the table and hit the woman so hard that she flew back. The lady ordered her to stand up. It seemed the difference in status between them was not enough for her. Ruvia is the Archduke's first daughter. Disrespect for her is tantamount to disrespect for the Grand Archduke Rusen. So the lady asked again if she really had several lives left since she was behaving like this. The maid began to justify herself and say that she would never dare to show disrespect to her. She was even trembling. The mistress noted that it was interesting to see what the other maids thought about this. The women immediately fell to their knees and noted that they too had been at fault, and therefore asked her to have mercy on them. They begged for mercy and said that they would definitely prepare everything. The lady said that she agreed with them and gave them another chance. The women were very grateful to her, bowed, and ran to the kitchen. They prepared a very good dinner for her. The girl was delighted. Even though she scolded the head maid in front of everyone, in any case, people here ignore and treat Ruvia with hostility. There are many ways to change the situation, such as gaining courage through good deeds and showing cruelty and destroying enemies. But the main problem is that all this requires effort. Even if she overcomes her laziness and sways people to her side, she will still be given away in a marriage of convenience as soon as she comes of age. Princess Ruvia already has a fiancé. He is the fourth prince of the Western Empire, a remarkable figure who has amassed enough power to threaten the crown prince despite having no right to the succession. He is the most outstanding suitor for us in the entire western part of the continent. Her life will go down the drain if she marries the fourth prince. Be that as it may, this union cannot be allowed, so she decided to act. A knight approached her from behind. He greeted the lady and said that the great Archduke was calling her to him. The girl was surprised and now asked if the Archduke was really calling her right now. The knight confirmed this, and the girl considered it an excellent opportunity. She asked the knight to escort her. As the Western proverb goes, cut the knot that twists itself. She would immediately sever ties with this family. The lady came and bowed. She introduced herself and greeted the great Archduke. Now she knew what kind of ruler the Grand Duchy of Ruxen was. Just by looking at him, you can tell that as a leader, he is impeccable. The man noted that she was not being friendly today, and the lady noted that she was not guilty of anything. Therefore, there was no reason to worry. After thinking for a while, the father noticed that she had changed, as if she were a completely different person. Basically, that's true. Well, the girl decided to tell him that it was just part of growing up. She was getting a little taller every morning, and it seemed like her personality was changing just as rapidly. The father was surprised and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl didn't understand what kind of reaction this was. Apparently, she thought that he wouldn't like it. Ruvia's birth mother was not from a noble family, but the great Archduke's love was so great that he wanted to take her as his wife. However, the daughter of his beloved woman will be carried away by a fever caused by all sorts of neglect from society and humiliation from her stepmother. It is unclear why this man did nothing. The father asked her if she knew why he had called her, and the girl replied that she had a rough idea. My father is going to scold me, but he will not tolerate unnecessary noise in his house. So he asks her to try to make sure this doesn't happen again. He'll talk to her mother later. The girl believed that he was simply asking her to cover the rotting wound with a rag and not pay attention. Father didn't understand what she was saying, and that made him a little angry. Ruvia told him that there were two options to heal the wound. The first is to take medication little by little and wait until it heals, and the second is to simply squeeze out the pus and thereby get rid of it. But since it is already too late, we must use the second option. She's leaving the Ruxin Duchy today. The servant was completely shocked and asked what the lady was talking about. Her father asked her again if she really thought he would listen to this nonsense, but the girl noted that he would have to listen to it. It's all because he is the cause of this wound. Ruvia knows she's an eyesore in this house. If it stays, it will never heal sooner, and they will continue to hurt each other. So for the good of everyone, she will leave. And when her father did not answer, she remarked that she would assume that he agreed and that she would leave the duchy within the day. After which, the girl thanked her father and told him to take care of himself. She turned around and started to leave, slamming the door behind her so that her father didn't have time to say anything. He didn't even try to hold her back, although it only played into her hands. Ruvia is actually such an unfortunate child. She will live this life happily for her sake. She began to collect her things, took her clothes, and also took a blanket instead of a sleeping bag. She doesn't have any jewelry, but she can earn money. In principle, this should be enough. Then someone approached her and asked what she was doing now. They say the princess left the mansion, so the servant thought it was worth stopping her. The Archduke turned to the knight and told him to watch the princess until she returned. It won't take too much time. The knight turned to the duke and asked what would happen if the princess really decided to leave the duchy forever. The man replied that then he would have to bring her back here by force. The man, of course, listened to his master and quickly left. The servant turned to the master and asked what he intended to do if the princess was brought against her will. He understands the master's feelings perfectly. The princess is not guilty of anything. The Archduke replied that he knew and understood this perfectly well. The princess acted a little differently. She was always so depressed. But today she looked more determined than anyone else. It seemed to him that she would forever fly away to where they could not reach. Earlier, her brother approached her and asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that she was going to leave the mansion. Her brother didn't understand what she was talking about and thought it was just some kind of stupid joke. Ruvia asked for forgiveness, but she thinks this is the only right path for her. But the brother did not understand why she decided this way, which is why the girl asked if there really were better options. If they had been, the situation wouldn't have gone so far. Her brother didn't know what to say to that. Therefore, the girl said that in that case she would already be leaving and also wished him good health. Her brother grabbed her hand and asked her to wait and take something from him. This is an amulet bearing the seal of the Grand Archduke Ruxin. If she has any pleasure, she must use it. It is an artifact with a lot of magic. He offered her to use it in case of emergency. She should have tried while Ruvia was alive, but now it's too late. She's ready to say goodbye to this house. But suddenly, she heard someone calling her very loudly. It was Marie, the mistress's maid, who, with tears in her eyes, said that she would go with her mistress. The girl did not understand how she could leave her because she would not be able to live without her mistress. In her haste, the main character completely forgot that this child was the only one who was on Ruvia's side. The lady asked Marie to come back. It would be very difficult for her with the lady. But the girl said that there was nothing to worry about and that she would be useful to the mistress, so she begged to be taken along. Ruvia didn't understand why she was being so stubborn. Nothing good would happen to her with her. But the girl said that she wanted to go with the lady because she liked her. She remembered the guy's words about how he was going after her because he liked her, and it was obvious. The lady nevertheless agreed, because if the girl wanted it that way, she would take her with her. Marie was very grateful to her and promised that she would be a smart girl. The lady asked if Marie had any money by any chance. The girl replied that she had a little, but she spent it on a cake. And she also said that she would definitely earn more money. The lady was surprised. The girl began to say that she was very capable and that it would not be difficult for her to get money. She was so cute that Ruvia even smiled. She asked again if Marie really liked cakes that much. The girl replied that, of course, she really loved strawberries. The lady asked what else she liked to eat. The girl said that she likes filet mignon and also veal tenderloin steak. In fact, she had never tried them, but she had seen the owners eating them and was very envious. Then Ruvia smiled and said that for dinner tonight, they would have filet mignon and strawberry shortcake. The girl got scared and asked again what they would do, because they had no money. The lady noted that money could be earned and asked the girl to follow her. The maid asked again what her mistress wanted to do and hoped that she was not going to do anything bad. Marie asked if the lady had any business in this establishment. The man asked what they had come for. Ruvia asked if she could borrow the instrument for a while. The man was surprised when he looked at the harp and noted that their establishment did not rent it out. The lady said she would give him 5 sen for 2 hours. He was very surprised, and Maria noted that the harp itself cost 10 sen. Well, our lady relied only on the power of the aristocracy. The man agreed and said he owed her the harp. When they left, Mary asked what her mistress intended to do with it. Ruvia noted that this was how she was going to make money and noted that this place would suit them. She asked Marie to hold her hat. The girl was surprised and asked the lady what she was going to do. Ruvia asked her to turn it over so that she could put the money in it. The girl could not believe that her mistress was actually going to play the harp now. People immediately heard this sound and began to believe that it was some kind of street concert. Everyone came to their senses. The maid was very worried. Everyone was shocked. They didn't know that there was such a skilled musician on the street. It was so nice to be able to play the harp again. In her past life, she couldn't even touch an instrument. A whole crowd gathered. They threw in a lot of coins. Marie thanked everyone. She was simply delighted. The crowd could not understand who could play the harp less well. Suddenly, the woman suggested that the girl give a concert in her house. Everyone started arguing. They lined up to see whose house they would host the concert at. One of the men suggested that she become a permanent musician in their home, and the noise and hubbub began. The lady told Maria that it was time for them to go. When Marie started counting the money, she realized that it came to about 300 sen. It seems that this is the monthly salary of ordinary citizens. The maid thought that the mistress had never held a musical instrument in her hands, so she was interested in how the mistress managed to play such a beautiful melody. The girl replied that she was simply a genius, and the maid was simply delighted. Maria noted that she thought so, which is why the lady always looked as if she lived in her own world. It was good that this girl trusted her. The lady was pleased with it. She asked the maid to keep track of this money. Now she will be responsible for all her savings. Ruvia is, after all, the princess of the Duchy of Ruxankama and cannot control the finances on her own, so Marie will be handling this. The girl was absolutely delighted. She promised that she would try, so you can trust her point. Now the mistress suggested going out to eat, and the maid, of course, did not refuse. Marie became very embarrassed and remarked that I also had to go to such a place for her sake. Ruvia replied that it was not because of her, and that the lady herself wanted it that way. She also likes veal tenderloin steak and strawberry shortcake, so she shouldn't jump to conclusions. The girl was simply delighted and told her that she would definitely try even harder. Ruvia asked me if she found it strange that her behavior had changed so much. The girl replied that it was certainly surprising, but everything was fine, because she was her mistress. She was her beloved mistress. And she likes how resilient she is now even more. But this does not mean that her character was bad before. It was just that before, her heart would break into pieces just from looking at her mistress. But she likes everything, both the way she was before and the way she is now. The lady smiled, and the girl asked what the gentleman was planning to do next. She thought that she would become a bard. Ruvia replied that this was not so. They would go to the line. The free city of Lynette, a land of the Western Empire that belongs to no one 200 years ago. It was an ordinary village. And now it is the most significant city on the continent, all thanks to the prestigious academy. Lynette Academy is a higher education institution with a wide range of specializations. Teenagers up to 20 years old study there. It's a place with deep memories for the girl. Ruvi simply founded this academy in one of her past lives. The lady decided to rent a room and inquired about rooms on the top floor. It cost 50 sen. The girl replied that of course there was, and asked which room she preferred and whether they would like to stay alone. The woman said she'd like a better room for two. Marie asked if they'd be staying there tonight. The lady replied that it was true, since they needed to board the ship to get to Lynette, and since they needed to catch the first flight, they couldn't spend the night here. The girl tried to explain to the lady that it was very expensive here, and she also had to buy a ticket. The lady noted that there was no need to worry. She had everything under control. While the mistress was taking a bath, Mary asked why she wanted to go to the bathroom. She assumed the girl was planning to enroll in the academy. The lady replied that this was true, and that freshmen were being recruited right now, so she wanted to take the entrance exam. Marie noted that chasing your dream is very inspiring, and her mistress is very cool. Basically, this is the first step to living as a sloth. If you are accepted, food and accommodation are provided free of charge, as the education here is skills-oriented. If you do well on the tests, there won't be any attendance issues, so that's a golden prize. Marie asked if the lady had decided what program she wanted to apply to. She noted that a special female engineer would be suitable for the lady, but the lady noted that she had not yet thought about this and needed to decide. Ruvia is going on vacation. She doesn't even think about studying. How many years of free food and idleness have I had? Look, she was smiling, but the lady decided to ask what was making her laugh so much. The girl noted that she was simply in a good mood. Today, she tried filet mignon for the first time, and tomorrow she would board a boat for the first time. The girl was so happy to be going to the links with her mistress, and she was incredibly happy just to be doing it next to her mistress. The lady remarked that once they got there, she would buy her a mountain of strawberry cakes. The next morning, Marie reported that she had already packed everything. The lady noted that it was necessary to buy something for the journey. After all, it would take 3 days to sail, and it was necessary to prepare in advance. And also, she opened the door and immediately saw Sir Urbo. She noted that she could see him and there was no need to hide. She told him not to pretend. He had been following them since yesterday. The gentleman greeted the lady, and she asked what he needed. She replied that the Duke had instructed him to ensure her safety, so he asked for understanding, because he was forced to follow her. The lady noted that she had no intention of sending him back. The man did not understand what she wanted from him then. Ruvia noticed that he works hard, so she invites him in for tea. Meanwhile, Marie whispered to the lady what they would do if he caught them. Even if you speak quietly, the owner of Mana, sir, will hear absolutely every word. Therefore, the lady did not answer anything and told him to drink this tea and accept it from her and Marie as a sign of gratitude for his care. The gentleman was very grateful to her and began to drink tea. After this, he turned to the lady and told her to return to the duchy. The lady replied that it was not interesting and the knight did not understand why this was so and whether she was really going to leave these lands. The lady noted, because it was indeed so, they were sailing away on today's ship. The knight declared that he could not allow this. The Duke ordered him to return her home even against her will, but only if she leaves his domain or doesn't return for a long time. This was actually unexpected. The girl hadn't expected it. She noted that she understood perfectly well that he had an order and a knight, and he was delighted to think that this meant that they were going to the duchy. The lady noted that he should also understand her situation, just as she understands his situation. The knight was in complete shock. He didn't understand what the lady was talking about. Everything went dark before his eyes, and he fell headfirst onto the table. Marie was very scared and immediately rushed to him and called for her mistress in panic. The lady told her to leave him like that. He fell asleep. Maria did not understand what this meant, but the lady noted that if she listened closely, she would even hear that he was snoring. It worked like clockwork. Her sleeping pills were good. The girl asked the lady why he fell asleep so suddenly. Ruvia noticed that he was probably tired, and she suggested moving him to the bed so that he could get a good night's sleep. And they said that Sir was the most outstanding of all the wielders of mana. He's a sucker for tea from the person he's spying on. He's so naive. The lady closed the door, left a note for the knight that the payment for the stay was due, and she was leaving it to him and hoped that this would not happen again. This is a punishment for his actions, not because she didn't want to pay. Marie was absolutely delighted by what she saw and hastened to inform her mistress that this was Port Lynette. Her eyes sparkled and her voice trembled with admiration. Meanwhile, the lady felt extremely tired. She could barely suppress a yawn, as long days on the road had worn her out. The 3 days spent on the ship had left their mark. The lady's entire body seemed to have become numb. Every muscle ached from the tension. Marie, not hiding her delight, shouted loudly for her mistress to look at the enormous port. For her, the sight was truly wondrous. However, the lady reacted calmly. She merely dryly noted that the port was certainly beautiful, but that it didn't move her. The girl was surprised that her mistress remained indifferent. Ruvia, noticing her surprise, said with a slight smile that she was, of course, surprised. Marie chuckled and noticed that the lady was lying. In fact, she simply didn't understand what everyone was so excited about. The lady was accustomed to such sights. This wasn't her first visit to such a large city, and she even lived here once. She was a teacher then, and walked these streets holding the hand of a boy who excitedly asked if they would live here. The lady then confidently replied that this city would become their new home, and her words were full of warmth and promise. The children were delighted with her words, especially when they learned that the lady was going to build a school for them here. The boy asked curiously what the lady would name the school. She suggested the children think of a name themselves and choose one together. The children perked up and began vying with each other to offer their ideas, happily raising their hands to be heard. The blue-haired boy suggested naming the school Lynette, and the idea immediately caused a storm of emotions among the others. Everyone was delighted with the proposal, but the lady gently advised them to look for another name to find something special. However, the children insisted that the name could not be changed. They wanted to name the school after their mistress, to perpetuate her name. Back then, it was just a small school for 5 orphans. The lady couldn't have imagined that it would become the best on the entire continent. Even if she had to spend 1,000 years at Lynette Academy, she would be happy, because the school became her pride. Almost 200 years have passed and very few memories remain from that time, only shadows of the past. But these warm memories still gave the lady strength and encouraged her a little in the present. Ruvia was soon informed that her registration was complete and the exam was scheduled for the following week. Marie confidently told the lady not to worry. She believed in her and knew that everything would definitely work out. Even if the lady fails her exams, she won't be upset. It won't be a problem for her. She'll find something else to do. Earning money is easy for her. Ruvia thought it was important not to forget how smart and capable her mistress was. She always managed to overcome difficulties. Talented students from all over the West flocked to the exams. Everyone wanted to get in, and the competition was fierce. As the level of knowledge had changed over the past 200 years. The demands were now much higher. The lady really didn't want to study, but she had to. Without preparation, she risked failing the exams. She told Maria to go to the dorm first. She decided to go to the library herself. She needed to study. The maid said that she would take the bag since the mistress wanted to stay in the library to study. Maria happily said goodbye and ran to the dormitory, leaving the lady alone with the books. Ruvia chose a book about the humanities, history, and philosophy. She decided to read it to gain some insight into the topic. The book's title seemed tiresome. She didn't understand why it was so interesting, but it was a pleasure to read. She wondered why she enjoyed reading so much. She realized it had been a long time since she'd read simply for pleasure. Her previous life had been harsh, full of battles, conspiracies, and death. There was no room for peace. Back then, she only dreamed of one day being able to calmly read books without thinking about battles and dangers. It seems her wish came true. Reading proved far more interesting than boring official documents. After reading, the lady decided to rest a little and went out into the garden to unwind in the fresh air. She was sitting quietly in the garden, not bothering anyone, when suddenly someone addressed her, breaking the silence. Opening her eyes, she saw a girl with pink hair standing in front of her, looking at her. The girl was surprised and said that at first she thought she had made a mistake, but it really was Mrs. Ruvia. She noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and a friendly, warm smile appeared on her face. It was Marquis Hansen's daughter, and her name was Janet. She greeted the lady and remarked that it was very surprising, as she hadn't expected to see her there. She was, after all, the famous Princess Ruvia of the Ruxan Duchy. She wondered why the girl at the academy had assumed she'd come to take the exams. Zanat admired her bravery. She believed that it would anger the Grand Duke. It is a great honor for any family if one of its members passes the exam at the academy, but it can also bring shame on the name of their house if they fail. The dim-witted Princess Ruxina, a disgrace to the duchy and a mockery of high society. Why is she even trying to take the entrance exam to Lynette? She'll fail it anyway. She's got plenty of courage. That's what she's trying to say. Marquis Hansen's daughter, Jeanette. Her father is one of the empire's mainstays, a great aristocrat, one might say. It's not far behind the Ruxan Duchy in importance, but she can handle it no matter what. The lady noted that before the most common thing she saw was blood, but here was a girl who looked like cotton candy, which was quite cute. The girl didn't quite understand what Lady Ruvia's smile meant. Meanwhile, the mistress came to have a little fun and said that, judging by her words, she wasn't at all afraid of failing. The girl noted that it was all because of this, that she had prepared with all her might. The lady asked if she could ask a couple of questions, as she had recently read a book and was confused. The girl replied that the lady could ask her as many questions as she wanted. Ruvia asked if she could answer how Kasan's problems affected future generations in the war to liberate the Southern Empire in 524 CE. Janet replied that it was a very standard question. She began to talk about the victory of the Southern Empire over the Northern one, describing how this affected the political balance, but the lady abruptly interrupted her, saying that she did not want to hear about the consequences of the war. She then cautiously asked about Kasan's role in the emancipation movement, noting that the movement had changed not only Southern society but also had an impact on the Eastern lands. The girl was frightened and hastened to justify herself, saying that she had meant something completely different and that her words had been misunderstood. To change the subject, she asked about Fernel's theorem concerning the refraction of light, and asked how to correctly establish the beta factor in the 38th equation for a given differential. The girl tried to answer something, but quickly realized that she would not be able to explain such a complex topic and fell silent. The lady, seeing her confusion, decided to ask an even more difficult question about the paradoxical reaction of the empathic nerve and the physiological reactions of the body. She noticed how the girl began to twitch nervously and wondered why such a reaction arose to such a simple question, in her opinion. The lady realized that this topic was probably not the best one for teasing the girl, and perhaps it would be worth changing the approach. She decided to ask the girl if she had prepared well for the classes, hoping to hear a more confident answer. The girl blushed deeply, but still said that she had prepared diligently and tried her best. The lady smiled and said that she was grateful for her efforts and that perhaps she should read a little more herself. You shouldn't think that the lady said this mockingly. She was genuinely worried about her and wanted to help. The girl turned away, and the lady could not understand what exactly caused her to behave like this. The girl began to walk away sadly, and the lady wondered if she should have pressed her harder, because if she continued to bully her, it would become tiresome. Although, deep down, the lady did not believe that Janet could defeat her in anything. Besides, she felt a little sorry for this sweet girl, who seemed to have no idea about some things. Feeling hungry, The lady decided to treat herself to something tasty in honor of the fact that the girl had studied well after all. A week later, her maid Maria was confident that her mistress would pass the upcoming exam without difficulty. But even if she doesn't cope, it's not scary. There's no need to worry too much about it and put too much pressure on yourself. The man announced the exam was beginning. The lady immediately prepared herself, pen at the ready. She was calm and ready to tackle the tasks. When she saw the questions, she thought they were too easy. She was at a loss, unsure of how to proceed, even though her teen had worked so hard. She also realized she'd forgotten to check the score required to pass. Answering perfectly might raise suspicion. Behind her sat Janet, confidently filling out the answers. The lady noticed her concentration and calm. From the way Janet worked confidently, it became clear that the tasks were really not difficult and perhaps there was no catch. The lady decided she would score exactly 90 points. This would be enough to pass the exam and not stand out. She thought it was a great plan. From now on, her life would be simpler. She could afford to be a little lazy. In the morning, while the lady was sleeping, someone was thinking about how she had done on the exam and whether she was confident in her answers. Despite the high level of competition, no one doubted her abilities. She was seen as a strong contender. The lady told everyone she was confident everything would be fine. She refused to entertain the thought of failure. She considered herself a genius. She was sure that passing the exam was just a formality for her. She gave just enough correct answers to earn a 90. That's definitely enough to pass. The maid asked if she'd heard right and added that everyone was talking about how difficult the exam was. Hearing this, she became even more nervous. The lady stood up abruptly and asked in surprise whether the exam was really as difficult as everyone said, as if she didn't believe what she heard. After all, on the way she overheard you saying that in the last 10 years, the exam had not been as difficult as this time. There are rumors that some people think it's pointless to wait for the results and simply leave without even hoping for a positive outcome. The lady could not believe her ears and wondered if she had gone too far when she expected to get at least 90 points. Although, if you think about it, there are real talents gathered here from all over the continent, so there is probably no need to worry in advance. She tried to calm herself down, hoping she was right, but she still crawled into the blanket and sat, wrapped up to hide her anxiety. The maid noticed that many seemed to have failed, and she couldn't understand how this had happened. The mistress admitted that she was a little worried herself. When she stated her name, the man was completely shocked to hear that the person standing in front of him was the princess of the Ruxan Duchy. The lady confirmed that it was indeed her, and then the man said that they had been waiting for her for a long time, asking them to open the letter quickly. As soon as she opened the envelope, she was overcome with a bad feeling, and after reading the letter, she realized that she was in serious trouble. Ruvia couldn't understand why she had the best score. She hoped there was a mistake, because she didn't think 90 points could be the highest. However, I understood perfectly well how such a result could be the best of all. Janet approached Ruvia, smiling faintly as she noticed they were meeting again. There was a certain confidence in her voice, as if she had been expecting this meeting for a long time. Janet asked curiously how the lady had done on the exam. There was a hint of mockery in her tone, as if she already knew the answer. Although, according to her, there was no point in even answering. Janet understood everything perfectly well. She added that there was no need to be upset. Passing the entrance exams to Lynette Academy was incredibly difficult. Janet remarked that if Ruvia wanted to retake the exam next year, she could always turn to her for help. Her voice was confident. Janet added that she thought she could be a great support to Ruvia. She was confident in her abilities and knew how to help. At that moment, the woman at the registration desk interrupted their conversation. She remarked that the lady seemed confused, hinting at a misunderstanding of the situation. Ruvia wanted to object, to explain that this wasn't true, but Janet snapped that she'd had enough of this kind of talk. Her voice sounded irritated. Janet smiled, noting that the lady was probably trying to hide the obvious result. Bowing her head respectfully, she asked permission to take her leave. Ruvia, feeling awkward, apologized, adding that she was simply too shy. Her voice trembled, betraying her nervousness. The woman with the registration understood everything perfectly. Ruvia hadn't even entered the academy yet, and she was already having problems with those around her. Ruvia was about to leave when the woman with the registration stopped her, saying that she had something that needed her attention. The woman smiled softly, noticing that there was at least one person who genuinely wanted to see her. It warmed her heart, even if everything wasn't going according to plan. Her hopes for an easy 4 years at the academy crumbled to dust. All dreams of a quiet life vanished when reality proved far more complex. A tall, imposing man, unmistakably Baron Cruzen, came out to meet her. His appearance immediately caught her attention, making her wary. Seeing in person the person who had scored the highest scores in the academy's history was truly amazing. Such an event doesn't happen every day. In her past life, Ruvia founded this academy herself and could not have imagined that the exams would become so difficult for future students. Entering the academy will only complicate her life because the attention on the person who scored the highest score will be constant and there will be no time to rest. Then she decided to clarify the situation right away and said that before starting the conversation, she wanted to clarify something in order to avoid misunderstandings. The man didn't seem to understand her words and asked again what exactly she was talking about, clearly not expecting such a start to the conversation. Ruvia replied that it was about her scores. She admitted that on some tasks she had simply gotten lucky and guessed the correct answers. Her high entrance scores didn't reflect her true level of knowledge. They were more a stroke of luck than a sign of her ability. The man laughed, noting that Lady Ruvia was not only intelligent but also able to display her abilities with modesty and grace. This combination of intelligence and modesty struck him as magnificent. He wanted Ruvia to understand that his admiration stemmed from more than just her success at the ball. Her intelligence and insight had made no less an impression on him. When he glanced at her answer sheet, his surprise was hard to hide. Even in short sentences, she clearly and concisely explained the essence of each question. Some of her answers seemed so precise and profound that they even transcended established academic dogmas and views. He could hardly believe it. In his entire life, he had never encountered such obvious talent. If this wasn't destiny, he no longer knew what it was. He realized that there was very little time left before retirement, but in the end, he would make every effort to reveal her outstanding potential. He was determined and didn't want to put it off any longer. But it was at that moment that Ruvia decided to take her own course. She calmly stated that she was going to cancel her application to the academy, which greatly puzzled him. The man didn't understand what she was saying. He tried to process her words and find some meaning in them, but to no avail. He thought he might have misheard, but Ruvia repeated. She was sorry to have misled him, but she had to go. The man asked her to stop and wait. He didn't understand why she was doing this or what was really going on. Then Ruvia frankly said that she had a good reason for this decision, although it was difficult for her to talk about it. Ruvia suffered from a chronic illness. She barely passed the exam, and her high score came as a surprise. But studying at the academy would be too much of a challenge for her. The man looked at Ruvia with interest and asked if he could find out what illness was plaguing her. His voice was full of concern, but a hint of curiosity was also evident. The director confidently assured her that he wanted to help. The academy, he said, had the best medical specialists, and perhaps someone could ease her suffering. However, Ruvia calmly replied that she suffered from migraines, a disease that could not be cured even on the advanced Western continent, where medicine had made great strides. She added that if she gets a little tense or worried, she starts to get severe headaches that prevent her from living and studying normally. If it weren't for this constant pain, she would certainly have tried to cope with her studies. But Ruvia felt that in her condition, it would be simply impossible. She assumed the director was already busy and thanked him for his attention. Due to illness, enrollment was impossible, but the academy will forever remain in her heart. However, the man wasn't about to give up. He thought for a moment and then offered her a completely different, unexpected option. The director said Ruvia could stay at the academy. She wouldn't have to attend classes regularly. They'd find a special approach for her. If she commits to studying, the director will personally ensure her passing grades. All classes and homework can be replaced with tests at her convenience. Ruvia thanked him warmly for the offer, but added that she couldn't make any promises now, as she wasn't confident in her abilities. She was about to leave, but the director reminded her of the academy's rule. No expulsion during the academic year is allowed, so that students do not drop out after receiving a scholarship. However, if Ruvia did decide to leave, no one would stop her. She considered it. The terms were truly favorable. It was unlikely they would offer better anywhere else, but the very fact that she had to make promises greatly unsettled her. The laws she was accustomed to didn't apply in this world. One of the local rules stated that if a person made a promise, it automatically became binding, regardless of the circumstances. This was because her soul energy was significantly more powerful than others. As soon as she made a promise, it took on force, and Ruvia was forced to fulfill it, with no right to back down. Realizing this, Ruvia firmly stated that she could not accept such conditions. She apologized, not wanting to appear ungrateful, but she couldn't promise anything under the circumstances. The academy director, after listening to her, nodded sympathetically. He said he understood her difficulties and was willing to consider only her doctor's report. Otherwise, unfortunately, they would have no other solution. Ruvia remained silent in response. She felt a little ashamed as the director was being sincere, not motivated by personal gain. He genuinely cared about her and her future. He was a true educator who genuinely cared about the academy's development and tried to retain talented individuals like Ruvia. His words were full of respect and support. Ruvia felt sorry that in this world, people like him and academies like him remained in the shadows. Their work and sincerity often went unnoticed, even though they deserved better. Finally, the director added that the academy's doors would always be open to her. They would await her return when she was well and ready to return to school. Ruvia recalled how the teacher was told that he would definitely continue to develop the academy. He wanted not only to preserve her legacy but also to widely disseminate the knowledge she left behind. She shuddered. noticing that the second director of the academy had the same zeal. If you looked closely, there was indeed something in common in their looks and gestures. Everything that was happening completely confused her. Ruvia gave up trying to figure it out and simply waved her hand, deciding not to bother her head with unnecessary thoughts. She said she had several conditions. Ruvia gently asked if the director was willing to listen to her and accept them. The director smiled warmly and confidently replied that he would certainly do everything she asked, without hesitating for a minute. Marie was simply delighted when she first saw Ruvia's room. Spacious, bright, and elegant, it looked as if it belonged to a noblewoman, not an academy student. Everything here was arranged with exquisite taste, and the place bore no resemblance to a typical dormitory. Marie immediately realized that such comfort was rare even in wealthy homes. This was truly worth the long journey. Marie thought all the trouble and travel were completely worth it when she saw where her mistress would now live. Now that they had finally arrived, it was time to breathe a sigh of relief. The mistress could rest peacefully in this cozy and luxurious room, enjoying the silence. Marie noticed that the lady had not only entered the academy but had also passed her exams with top marks. She wondered why Ruvia had asked her to conceal this fact, since it would soon be revealed anyway. However, Ruvia firmly insisted that no one would know about her success. That's why she asked Marie to keep it a secret and not reveal her achievements to anyone. Cruz and Ruvia set 2 conditions that had to be followed unconditionally, and this surprised the academy administration. The first condition was the right to leave the academy at any time if unforeseen circumstances arose, which seemed unusual for such a talented student. The second condition concerned keeping her exam results confidential. Ruvia insisted that no one but her superiors know about it. The academy's director couldn't understand why such outstanding achievements should be hidden. Her scores were record-breaking and would have been a historic achievement for the school. He believed that such achievements should be known to everyone, but Ruvia explained that excessive attention could cause a deterioration in her health. The man didn't fully understand what illness was being discussed and initially tried to object. He found it strange that someone would voluntarily give up fame. However, he eventually realized that changing Ruvia's terms was impossible. Her resolve was unwavering, and the director was forced to give in. Marie began to sob with resentment. Her mistress deserved universal recognition, and she wanted her talents to be known throughout the continent. But Ruvia hadn't planned on living like ordinary students. Her plans and views on studying were completely different, and she wasn't striving for popularity. Ruvia felt she had to do something to improve the situation. Her thought was that Maria needed a little pampering to make her feel better. The director should have been given some research work, perhaps even his own, so that he could use it as some kind of contribution to the success of the academy, which would give him an additional achievement. When Maria asked why the lady was lying in bed, Ruvia answered calmly that she would rest and that from now on, she would sleep constantly, feeling how her body needed rest. At this time, the rest of the students are having fun, hanging out, and making new friends before the entrance ceremony, preparing for an important moment in their lives, which creates an atmosphere of anticipation. Some of them have already managed to become very close, and perhaps they are truly lucky because such relationships help them survive moments of uncertainty and anxiety. But, as always, for geniuses, solitude is an inevitable part of their journey. They are always alone, absorbed in their own thoughts and reflections. The maid didn't understand what was going on, her gaze puzzled, but even in the future, she wouldn't care. She continued to think that she needed to establish friendly relations with others. Ruvia replied that she would make friends, but only after a while. She needed some time, about 70 hours, before she could do anything new. The maid suggested to the mistress that she start looking for new friends, and perhaps a boyfriend, so as not to dwell on her loneliness and to find support among people. The mistress was shocked by this proposal. She hadn't expected such advice from her maid, who was always calm and reasonable. She couldn't understand how this could be possible. A boy? The maid explained that the 4th prince was studying at the academy, and this could be her chance. The maid believed that their meeting might not be accidental, that fate might bring them together, and that she might be destined to be with this prince. The maid's imagination already had a vivid picture. Her mistress and the 4th prince, as a couple, together at some ball or reception ceremony, surrounded by attentive glances. The mistress asked Maria to repeat her words, not believing her ears. She couldn't accept that her maid was speaking of the prince with such confidence. Maria reiterated that the 4th prince not only studied at the academy, but was also the class leader, making him an important figure among the students. The lady was shocked by this news. It was too unexpected, and she couldn't believe that a man like the prince could be in her life. While the maid was pouring tea, she noticed something was wrong with her mistress. Ruvia looked puzzled and thoughtful, as if questions were swirling around in her head. Ruvia was seriously considering this. She looked frowning, as if her thoughts were troubling her. Something didn't add up, and she couldn't get over this idea. She couldn't understand why this prince was studying at Lynette's academy. If he was from the imperial family, it would have been better for him to remain in the palace rather than here. If Ruvia had known that the meeting with the fourth prince would happen so quickly, she would have tried to resolve the matter before leaving the duchy to avoid any possible problems. However, if you think about it, she wouldn't have to leave the dorm, because in 4 years she would have finished her studies and received a diploma without facing any unnecessary hassle. The chances of meeting the prince during this time were slim, as Ruvia had no plans to leave her hiding place and intended to spend all her time in her room, avoiding all meetings. Besides, being a runaway princess, her marriage to him would be declared invalid, and this could solve most of her problems, relieving her of unnecessary obligations and pressure. If this did not happen, Ruvia would be forced to resolve the situation on her own, but this no longer seemed such a difficult task to her, since she was used to dealing with difficulties. However, she felt very good in bed, and now she was happily enjoying her rest, as if her whole life was reduced to nothing but cozy solitude and comfort. After 12 hours, the maid, who was very worried about her mistress's condition, brought her food, hoping that it would help her regain her strength and return to her normal rhythm of life. After another 24 hours, the maid tried to wake Ruvia, worried that her long absence might affect her well-being and put her in a negative mood. 48 hours had passed and the maid had already tried all the methods to wake up her mistress, but none of them worked, and Ruvia still did not wake up. Finally, after 72 hours, Ruvia woke up, reporting that she had finally had a good night's sleep and was feeling great, despite the long rest and stress of the last few days. Ruvia noticed Maria's strange behavior, which immediately caught her attention. She quickly realized something was wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She tried to speak to the maid, but she refused to speak to her, clearly avoiding contact. This alarmed Ruvia, causing her to wonder about what was happening. Ruvia noticed that Marie seemed more confident, believing her mistress didn't need anything from such a simple girl. This made her think something was wrong with their relationship. Realizing the maid was offended, Ruvia decided to calm her down a bit and offered to try something delicious. She hoped this would help ease the tension and establish rapport. Ruvia offered to eat strawberry cake, but the maid immediately turned away, clearly not interested in such an offer, and refused, which surprised Ruvia even more. The lady thought that in that case, we could go to Meion, a restaurant that serves delicious spaghetti with seafood and tomatoes. She even suggested we get some strawberry juice to go. Ruvia decided that if the maid didn't join in, she would eat everything herself. This prompted Marie to approach and remark that such efforts were unnecessary and that she shouldn't worry about her condition. Maria still couldn't hide her distress and admitted she couldn't do anything about it. This underscored her concern, even if she didn't show it openly. Ruvia was puzzled by how anyone could not care for their mistress. It seemed impossible to her, as caring for the person you serve was a natural part of their relationship. Ruvia explained that just as a child needs its mother, so too should a servant be close to her mistress. This care was an important part of their mutual bond. Ruvia said that if they didn't leave soon, there would be a lot of people on the street and they might run into a crowd. Therefore, she wanted to leave as early as possible to avoid unnecessary inconvenience. Maria noticed that the lady only had 20 sen left and decided to check if she had any money. It was a question that clearly bothered her, given the current situation. The lady was shocked and asked in surprise what the girl had been eating all this time, given their limited means. This clearly left her quite shaken. Marie calmly replied that she'd been eating buns left over from the previous days. She reminded him that housing and food were provided only to students, and she should have been more careful. The lady asked the girl to show respect, but Marie immediately replied that there was no need to apologize, and that she did not need excessive politeness about it. Everything was fine. She liked these buns. Then the lady asked curiously if Maria knew what she hated most in the world. It's a question she always asks. Ruvia replied that what she hates most is when people live in poverty. If someone is dear to her, she wants them to live with dignity, be well-fed, well-dressed, and in need of nothing. That's why her maid, Marie, must live the same way. Marie tried to explain that simply being near her mistress was enough for her, that this alone was enough for her happiness. However, Ruvia disagreed and insisted that the maid follow her. Marie was a little confused, unsure of what exactly she was about to do. Ruvia said they would go earn money, and this time the goal wouldn't just be to earn money, but to collect as much as possible. It was a clear goal, and they were confidently moving toward it. All the students looked so energetic and full of energy that Mrs. Ruvia couldn't help but notice how wonderful this time was. In her eyes, it was a moment of special upliftment. She couldn't help but notice Marie staring at her, and she asked what it was about. There was a hint of interest in her voice. Marie, a little embarrassed, admitted that the lady looked amazingly beautiful in this outfit. Her words were sincere and full of admiration. Ruvia smiled, noticing that this was indeed the case. She was pleased with her appearance and happily accepted Marie's compliment. The maid, always attentive, added that her mistress was the most beautiful and asked curiously what had prompted Ruvia to choose this particular dress. Ruvia explained that since the beginning of the school year, All students have been wearing the academy uniform, and she simply needed this dress to earn some money. Look, the maid sincerely hoped her mistress wasn't up to no good. Ruvia, laughing, replied that she was simply being silly and not worth worrying about. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and Ruvia looked up to see what was happening. It was a moment of surprise, and everyone's attention was riveted on what was happening. One girl screamed loudly at another, accusing her of inappropriate behavior and demanding an immediate apology. Her words were full of anger and aggression. They were students from the academy, and the one who had just been insulted took the blame and apologized, despite the obvious injustice of what was happening. The insulting girl didn't let up, declaring that her opponent's appearance immediately revealed her to be of a lower class. She looked at her with disdain, considering herself superior. Ruvia wasn't surprised by this conflict. Such situations usually occurred in such institutions, and there was nothing new in such student behavior. Ruvia hit the girl again, not giving her a chance to explain, and asked if she really called that an apology. She couldn't believe they would teach her that way in her house. Most likely, this girl had no home to speak of. She continued to cry and tried again to apologize, but her words were useless. Marie asked the lady how they should act in this situation, what they should do next. The question was sincere, as the situation was quite complex. Ruvia asked why she was still standing there. Time was ticking and they needed to leave as they were running late. The girl reminded him of this, not hiding her impatience. Marie wondered if they couldn't help this poor girl given her pitiful state. She sincerely hoped there was a way to intervene. The mistress asked again who they were talking about, referring to the commoner. The maid confirmed that they were talking about her, which added tension to the conversation. The lady continued that this girl's behavior was entirely consistent with her low birth. This attitude was the norm for her, which only confirmed her contempt. If this girl truly believed herself guilty, she should have gotten down on her knees and begged for forgiveness, like a dog, according to the mistress. That was her view of the situation. The girl tried to say at least something in her defense, but the aristocrat shouted at her to quickly carry out her orders, without wasting time on empty talk. Ruvia noted that the maid probably understood perfectly well that such situations happened all the time, and they couldn't help everyone who found themselves in trouble. Maria was upset and noted that she understood what was happening, and the lady noted that this option could not be criticized, since differences in origin are present even within the academy. The maid agreed with her mistress and confirmed that this was how Ruvia usually acted, always acting at her own discretion. This was her usual behavior. However, this little brat still didn't understand much. She was just beginning to grow up. Ruvia didn't found the academy to watch such childish antics. The lady added that it was impossible to ignore this, and she nevertheless decided to intervene, stepping forward sharply and, without thinking, hitting the aristocrat in the head with her heel. The girl screamed, trying to figure out who had dared to do this. There was rage and surprise in her voice. She was completely delighted by what had happened. The lady's voice came from behind, calmly declaring that it was she who had initiated this. Ruvia made no secret of her intentions. The girl was shocked when she saw Princess Rexina standing before her. Shocked, she couldn't believe the lady herself had decided to do such a thing. The lady noticed that this was not done on purpose, and then asked the girl again, who asked her to stand in this place, under attack. In response, the girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and quietly said that lady should be more careful next time, not to cause herself unnecessary problems. The lady smiled back and asked why the girl hadn't introduced herself earlier. It seemed odd, since she couldn't have failed to know who she was. The girl became even more frightened, her heart beating faster. She couldn't believe the princess was asking her such questions. The lady repeated, in a cold tone, that she had asked why the girl hadn't introduced herself properly. She seemed unaware of who stood before her. In fear, the girl immediately bowed deeply, introducing herself as the daughter of Viscount Felon, trying to ease the tension and show respect for Ruvia. The lady sighed and wondered why the girl's knees were so low. Apparently, it was important, because she couldn't understand how she could have positioned her legs like that. The girl's left knee was slightly twisted, which piqued the lady's interest. Seeing this, she asked again, why had she placed her right hand on her waist? The lady noticed that the girl seemed to deliberately tilt her head before arching her back. Perhaps this was a new method of greeting, and she decided to inquire. The aristocrat, despite her confusion, apologized. However, she said she would teach the girl and, to avoid leaving anything unsaid, suggested she try again. The princess, without hesitation, added that she needed to bow again, but that this should not be perceived as something wrong. Everything must be done according to the rules. The girl confidently replied that she had been well trained and would do everything as expected. To avoid making any mistakes, she promised to follow the advice and would thank the lady later. The lady again reminded the girl to bow her head lower and take her time, as modesty and elegance are important elements of behavior in Western culture. She needed to be more refined. Afterwards, the lady approved of her actions and said that her greeting now complied with all the rules of etiquette. She noted that the girl had learned her lesson well. The girl thanked her for her guidance. The lady in turn asked if she would like to continue her training, as she was willing to offer a few more useful tips. However, the girl, without hesitation, immediately bowed. She expressed gratitude for the lesson and declared that it was quite enough for her. She had urgent business to attend to and, apologizing, she stated that she had to leave, but with gratitude for the knowledge she had received. The mistress announced that it was time to leave this place. The maid was completely delighted. It was a true miracle for her. Once again, the mistress's heart had conquered her feelings. Ruvia couldn't understand what was so special about what was happening around her, or why other people were so delighted. It all seemed completely alien and incomprehensible to her. Suddenly, Ruvia heard someone thank her. The unexpected gesture caught her attention, causing her to stop and look around. Turning around, she noticed a simple girl named Ryudinka, who bowed to her gratefully. Ryudinka said she was immensely grateful because it was for her sake that her mistress had done such a deed. Ruvia approached the girl and calmly noted that her actions weren't aimed specifically at her. It was for a completely different reason. The lady explained that she wanted to teach a lesson to one of the women closest to her world, Mina. This was her personal decision, unrelated to the commoner. Therefore, in her opinion, there was no point in jumping to conclusions. She didn't even know this girl was here. She had nothing to do with this matter. Despite this, the girl was still touched by the mistress's words. She noticed that Ruvia hadn't really meant to inconvenience her. The name was Milia, and she promised herself she would never forget the gesture her mistress had made for her. It left an indelible mark on her heart. Maria couldn't help but ask again if the lady truly wanted to help this girl. Her doubts were understandable, and she decided to clarify. Ruvia had long ago explained that this wasn't true. None of this was happening out of a desire to help or anything like that. She added that they needed to move on. It was time to leave, and they shouldn't dwell on these disturbing thoughts. All this time, a guy had been watching what was happening. He had a feeling that this girl was a very interesting and unusual freshman. But after thinking a little more, he quickly changed his mind. Perhaps she should be named his future daughter-in-law. The young man couldn't have imagined that his future daughter-in-law would be so charming. He was stunned by her appearance and demeanor, and never expected such an impression from her. He was puzzled by rumors that she was a recluse, because in reality she was nothing like that. Where these rumors originated, he couldn't understand. The prince remarked that Ezekiel should be more careful with his choice of words. He understood that in their world, every word could be important, and he needed to be more careful. The boy asked Ezekiel not to look at him like that. It was a look that was frightening, and he didn't want his older brother to continue looking at him with such intensity. The eyes of the elder brother, the emperor, were truly terrifying. There was something about them that made one feel uneasy, as if they were seeing more than they should. Ezekiel apologized and, somewhat hesitantly, asked if it was true that it was better to call them the eyes of a beholder rather than the eyes of an emperor. He wasn't sure what to call them exactly. The eyes of the contemplator. Currently, only one person on the entire continent possesses this gift, the fourth Prince of Orleans. It is a special ability that allows one to see the essence of things. The eyes of the beholder have a unique ability to discern the truth hidden behind external appearances. These eyes are considered the symbol of emperors and are often referred to as the eyes of the emperor. The owner of these eyes was destined to become the ruler, and at the moment, a fierce struggle was being waged for the right to inherit power in the Western Empire between the crown prince and the fourth prince. The prince warned them that they were not alone in this academy and that they needed to be careful. The battle for power required attention and caution to avoid unnecessary risks. Ezekiel noted that if the crown prince himself was here, then he should be the one on guard, and promised that she would take this into account in her further actions. He also added that the future of the prince's daughter-in-law looks truly exciting and difficult to imagine. These words could not help but draw attention to her extraordinary destiny. This woman is no recluse, but an incredible beauty whose looks and charisma would outshine anyone in the empire. Her likes can be found on only a few fingers of one hand. Regarding the way she interacted with the Viscount's daughter, he couldn't help but remark on her behavior. It was pure perfection. Her charm left no one indifferent. Ezekiel inquired about his opinion of the princess, asking him to share his first impressions of her character and behavior at this academy. The fourth prince replied that she was beautiful, which surprised the boy a little. After all, that clearly wasn't enough to express all his thoughts and feelings about the princess. The fourth prince simply remained silent in response to his comment. The boy realized there was no point in discussing this topic with him any further. There was clearly nothing new to be found. This reaction was quite typical of him, but the boy still couldn't help but wonder why the crown prince had returned to the academy after completing the mandatory 2 years of training. He had already completed all the required courses, and now it was completely unclear why he was here again, and in the role of a temporary teacher, which seems strange and not entirely logical. The fourth prince noted that the crown prince's intentions were completely unclear to him. He couldn't figure out what exactly he was planning. His actions seemed mysterious, and nothing provided any clear clues. The reason, they say, is that the crown prince misses the academy, but the fourth prince himself doesn't believe it. He's certain no one in their right mind would take such a reason seriously. The fourth prince couldn't even begin to guess what lay behind such intentions, finding them simply absurd. In his eyes, it resembled playing with fire, too dangerous to trust. Today, the prince is completely absent. His absence baffles everyone expecting his active participation, and no one can figure out what he's doing at this moment. Rumor had it that the fourth prince had heard that the crown prince was currently at the casino. This only increased his surprise and even displeasure. Ezekiel could never forgive him. The fourth prince remarked that perhaps the crown prince had come here not to continue his games, but to rest. However, he was certain that his actions should be forgotten. Ezekiel couldn't understand how such behavior could be easily forgotten, and more importantly, he was uneasy even mentioning it to his older brother. Everything that was happening baffled him. The fourth prince stated that he wasn't concerned. His opinion was clear. However, it seemed his younger brother remained concerned, which only made the situation even more tense. He also asked if Ezekiel had completed his dissertation, hinting that he must have a lot on his plate. This prompted Ezekiel to consider the importance of his studies. Ezekiel flinched slightly at the question, quickly replying that he hadn't come here to deal with such serious matters. He wanted to relax and enjoy the moment, forgetting about work. Ezekiel declared he would go first to save time, while the fourth prince remained where he was, continuing to look down, lost in thought. His thoughts were taking him far from the current situation. The maid, seeing all this, asked again if her mistress really intended to work here. Her questions were filled with anxiety and uncertainty, which only emphasized the strange atmosphere in the air. Ruvia wondered if there were truly issues worth addressing, and whether she considered them important. She was a little concerned, but she wasn't sure. Marie replied that there were certainly problems because it was a casino and there was always risk. The place attracted people accustomed to gambling. As they walked, shouts, laughter, and excited cries could be heard. The aristocrats didn't hold back, spending large sums of money, absorbed in their games without a second thought. Yes, this entire building is connected to the casino, and it is clear that the gentlemen expect to profit from the gambling that takes place here every day. Marie insisted that she and the lady leave this place before it was too late, because such games could be dangerous for anyone. Ruvia calmly replied that there was no need to worry, because she was a good card player and could keep everything under control even if the atmosphere was tense. The maid reminded her that it wasn't how she played, but the process itself. Gambling here attracts people with addictions. It's not safe. Ruvia smiled and stated that she didn't look like a person addicted to games, and asked again if the maid was exaggerating the situation. The maid clarified that she had not meant her personally, but that the very nature of gambling is always a risk, especially for those who cannot stop. Ruvia agreed that the maid was right, but she was determined to do something a little different and was not going to give in to this dangerous atmosphere. You could call it a game of justice. The maid didn't quite understand what this really meant to those mistresses. She could only guess at the meaning of their words, but she clearly sensed the tension of the situation. There are certainly those in this place who use dishonest methods. These people win money by deceiving others. Their cunning and sophistication are conspicuous, creating anxiety. Ruvia decides that these are the very people she wants to rob. Her goal is to punish the swindlers and deprive them of what they so easily earned through dishonest means. The fight against injustice is on her mind. Of course, she has good intentions, but extorting money from scammers is becoming almost a pastime. It's a profitable endeavor, and even moral principles don't stop her. Although Ruvia herself understands that this brings her pleasure, as it brings back memories of the old days when she herself used to do similar things, she can't help but remember how skillfully she deceived people, setting traps for them. To start, Ruvia decides to win a little money at the dice table. 20 sen isn't a huge amount, but it's enough to try her luck. It's not particularly risky, but there's still a thrill. Marie, noticing that the game is getting out of control, tries to help her mistress. She suggests betting a different amount, one she considers more reasonable, but Ruvia continues to stick to her plan. Ruvia, hearing the maid's comments, responded with a smile. She reminded her that she herself had recently said that gambling was evil, but now it seemed she no longer cared. The maid, seeing that Ruvia wasn't going to back down, began to doubt. She admitted she didn't know what was going on, but Ruvia was firm in her resolve. They had to win at any cost. Marie was absolutely thrilled when they earned their first 200 sen. She immediately began dreaming of more, imagining how they would soon become truly rich. Ruvia remained more reserved. However, Ruvia realizes that it's impossible to make money gambling. She looks at the maid, reflecting on how pointless such games are despite all the winnings. Marie is surprised when Ruvia stands up and heads for the exit. She says they're winning and that it would be foolish to leave now since luck is on their side. But Ruvia remains adamant. Ruvia decided it was time to play a different game. She was preparing for the next stage of their plan, which was far more important and ambitious than simply winning the dice. Everything was going according to plan. The maid, noticing Ruvia's seriousness, asks if they should continue. She suggests putting all the games aside and simply enjoying the process, but Ruvia firmly rejects her suggestion. Ruvia replies that if they're already here, there's no point in wasting time. They need to do everything they can to complete their task. She's determined to try to get more. Ruvia asks about the maid's 3,000 sen. She tries to convince her mistress that such a sum is entirely possible. Ruvia is confident that luck will be on their side. In such a huge casino, full of gamblers, there are bound to be those trying to cheat the system. After all, where big money is involved, there are always scammers. A family could live for a whole year on 3,000 sen, depriving themselves of everything. This amount would allow them to forget about poverty and live quite comfortably. If she manages to earn this money, she'll be able to put her financial worries to rest for a while. And if she wins even more, she won't even get out of bed. She carefully scanned the room, trying to determine who might be a good fit. At that moment, she heard a man complain that he'd been counting on a flush, but the cards had turned out to be completely different. Everyone around him watched his game with interest, discussing how much he'd already earned. The spectators' curiosity only grew, as it's not every day you get to see someone win big. The spotlight fell on a young man with ash blonde hair, playing with incredible confidence. His composure betrayed a man accustomed to taking risks and knowing exactly what he was doing. His face expressed both cunning and calculation. He was a born con man, and Ruvia realized he was the perfect man for her purposes. A moment later, he turned to a woman nearby, and with a slight smile invited her to sit at the table and play together. It was to Ruvia that he approached, inviting her to participate in the game. She didn't hesitate and readily agreed. The man asked if she knew the rules of poker, since that was what they were going to play. Ruvia answered confidently. She was well acquainted with the rules of this game. Hearing this, the man's smile widened, and he said that was wonderful, meaning they could begin. He added that if anything seems unclear, don't hesitate to ask. Everyone is here to enjoy the game. Then he deftly shuffled the deck, finally inviting them to begin the game. The first few games proceeded as usual without any unexpected developments. It seemed as if the opponents were simply testing each other, not revealing all their cards. But in the fifth game, the situation changed dramatically. When Ruvia glanced at her opponent's cards, she noticed that luck was clearly on his side this time. His hand looked too good to be a fluke. She smiled, immediately realizing that he was at work here. The game was unfolding suspiciously, and she had no doubt he was cheating again. He watched her reaction carefully and concluded that this beautiful lady wanted to tell him something. However, he was in no hurry to initiate the conversation. But Ruvia merely replied calmly that she was simply waiting for the next move, which would decide the outcome of the game. She didn't show any excitement, but deep down she knew something was fishy. To her surprise, the trick this guy pulled off wasn't just a simple trick, but genuine magic. He wasn't just skillfully juggling cards, he was using supernatural powers. At the crucial moment, he used teleportation magic, changing the arrangement of the cards right before everyone's eyes. It was so quick and seamless that an ordinary player wouldn't have suspected a thing. In a single move, he created a top-level combination, perfectly executed and devoid of any trace of interference. Such mastery could deceive even the most experienced players. No matter how skilled a person, they couldn't win against such a sophisticated cheater. Their only chance of winning was to see through his ruse and catch him in the act. If, of course, the player can do it. Ruvia calmly declared that she had the combination ready. Her voice was even, but something strange flashed in her eyes. Unfortunately, his cards were stronger. He had a 3 flush. Ruvia merely chuckled, saying she'd probably stop there. She apologized and hinted that it was time to wrap things up. Against her, the one who is able to sense the smallest fluctuations of mana, who literally feels their movement. Using magic in a card game with her is like laying your cards on the table, as any changes in the flow of mana will not go unnoticed. The man remarked admiringly that this was simply incredible. He'd been playing cards for years, but had never before encountered such an amazing player. The lady remarked with a slight smile that this was the first time she had encountered such a wonderful person. There was a distinct hint of sarcasm in her voice. But the man, not catching the mockery, took it as a sincere compliment, became embarrassed and sighed heavily, hiding his embarrassment. Even in spite of the defeat, the fact that such a charming lady called him a good man lifted his spirits and gave him confidence. The girl watched him with interest, amazed that he still hadn't gotten the sarcasm. Then, with a slight smile, she suggested they play the final round for high stakes. The lady clarified his intentions, and the man, with a slight excitement in his voice, confirmed. If so, then all the money would be at stake. She merely shrugged, saying that she only had 1,000 sen, and added that in that case he would most likely be playing at a loss. The man calmly replied that in the worst case he would lose 2,000, and, judging by his tone, he was quite happy with that. But there was one condition. If the man won, she had to fulfill his request. This offer came unexpectedly, and the lady became wary, suspecting a trick. Gazprom was surprised and asked what they were talking about. The man calmly explained that, if luck was on his side, he wanted to spend the day with her. The The lady was indignant. She was outraged that he had dared to make such a demand. She decided that he was either a joker or a man lacking common sense. Rising from her seat, she coldly declared that she had no intention of agreeing to such terms. Her refusal was categorical, and she had no intention of changing her mind. The man flinched slightly, taken aback by her reaction. He didn't understand why she was rejecting his proposal so abruptly, as if it were an insult. The lady noted mockingly that he hadn't even offered 20,000, so he thought he could buy her attention for just 2,000. She was both amused and angered. In his eyes, she looked cheap, and that was what irritated her most. She was upset to realize that he didn't even try to hide his assessment. The crown prince bowed unexpectedly, apologizing for his impudence. Then he proposed another option, hoping she would finally agree. He admitted that 2,000 was indeed too little, but he had a different proposal. Just have tea with her. It seemed more innocent and less provocative. The lady nodded in agreement. This was already acceptable. She was so confident of her victory that she saw no reason to deny him such a trifle. They began the game. Each player was to draw 3 cards and then reveal them. The fate of their dispute depended on just these few moves. When the man revealed his cards, his combination was 777. He smirked smugly, glancing at Ruvia, as if he was already celebrating his victory, confident in his luck. Ruvia accepted the challenge calmly, showing no emotion. She laid out her hand, 222, on the table. Her gaze was confident, even though the cards didn't seem to favor her. The atmosphere around them grew tense. It was now clear that Ruvia too held a strong hand. The tension grew, and the outcome of this game no longer seemed so predictable. Soon, they each received 5 additional cards. All the man had to do was wait for a quad. If luck was on his side, that would guarantee him an absolute victory. A quad was a combination of 4 cards of the same rank. The man watched the hand closely, wondering if luck would turn his way at this late hour. Ruvia calmly watched her opponent and told him to draw cards. He knew he only needed to change 1 card to win, and now was the perfect time to do it. Suddenly, she felt a surge of magical energy. Everything became clear. He had cast a spell on his last card, just as she had suspected all along. The man raised his head and asked if their agreement still stood. His voice was confident, but his eyes betrayed a hidden excitement and anticipation of the outcome. Ruvia nodded, confirming that everything was still according to the rules. However, before discussing the consequences, they had to determine the winner of this game. They both glanced at the man's cards, 4 sevens, 4 of a kind. Everyone around him was sure he had won. It seemed obvious. But suddenly, a voice rang out. Ruvia must show her cards. She did so, and a royal flush appeared on the table. Everyone froze in amazement. No one expected this. The crown prince, watching the game closely, noticed that his mistress was clearly celebrating her victory. He acknowledged her triumph and added that the game had been tense and he had played well. But the crown prince wasn't the only one skilled in cunning. The lady was confident in her abilities and knew how to outplay her opponent, because in gambling, it's not just luck that wins, but also intelligence. The fact that both quads and a royal flush came up at the same time was an almost impossible coincidence. She'd obviously planned this round in advance, and every move had gone exactly as she'd planned. She foresaw that the prince would try to influence the cards with magic, and created a situation in which he would inevitably receive a quad, leaving himself only the strongest hand. So, following her plan, fate itself gave her the highest combination of cards, leaving her opponent no chance of winning. As a result, their winnings amounted to a whole 4,000, and for now this amount should be enough to not think about money for some time. The lady won absolutely everything, leaving her opponent without a single coin. She even felt a little sorry for the crown prince, whom she had so skillfully outplayed. Meanwhile, the prince, leaning back in his chair, admitted that the game had been exciting. He called the game an honor and enjoyed the moment despite the defeat. Intrigued, he looked at his rival and politely asked if he could find out her name, since such an intelligent and beautiful woman certainly shouldn't remain a stranger. The lady, without expressing any particular emotion, calmly replied that her name was Ruvia, without adding anything extra. The crown prince smiled slightly, turned to her, and, looking thoughtfully into her eyes, remarked that her name was very beautiful. He was also somehow certain that their paths would cross again. Ruvia answered without hesitation that she doubted it. However, the prince was adamant and, with easy certainty, declared she was mistaken as their meeting was inevitable. The lady didn't argue. She simply turned and, without looking back, walked away, leaving the prince alone with his thoughts. When they returned to the restaurant, the maid was shocked. They had in their hands not 400, but a whopping 4,000. She couldn't believe they'd hit such a big jackpot. But something else worried her. If the bag of money was left open, someone would definitely steal it. She had to be careful not to lose everything in an instant. But Ruvia was adamant. She firmly declared that she would not give up a single coin to anyone. The money belonged to them, and she had no intention of parting with it. The lady graciously offered the young man a meal and wished him bon appétit. However, Deep down, she knew the young man had figured out her scheme and was perfectly aware that she had cheated. The young man's last glance left no doubt. He'd guessed everything. There was no malice in his eyes, only a slight smile, as if he'd known all along how it would end and had no intention of revealing it. But, surprisingly, he said nothing. Why had he simply remained silent, instead of confronting her? It remained a mystery, and it left her feeling uneasy. What was particularly alarming was the way he spoke of meeting again. He sounded confident, as if he knew for certain that their paths would cross again. The maid cautiously asked her mistress who she thought this mysterious man was. Maria remarked that he was quite attractive. The lady, instead of answering, looked away thoughtfully. She couldn't shake the feeling that this young man reminded her of someone, but she couldn't yet figure out who. However, she was far more impressed by his magical abilities than by his appearance. The way he teleported the cards without leaving a trace spoke of a mastery beyond the capabilities of a mere mage. Mere wielders of mana are incapable of such feats. This was something transcendental, a level attainable only by supreme mages, and such beings can be counted on the fingers of one hand in the Empire. There were no more than 20 of them in the entire Western Empire. She simply couldn't help but know each of them. Was this really a man standing before her whose name should be known to every mage? The young archmage, after some thought, it finally dawned on her. This boy was the crown prince of the Western Empire, Wildheim. He possessed the most extraordinary magical talent in history. However, if it really was him, what was the crown prince doing in such a place? She couldn't find an explanation. Ruvia decided there was no point in wasting time thinking about it. This man would never appear in her life again, and there was no point in thinking about him. She'd earned a little money. Why not indulge in a little spending now? They entered an expensive boutique filled with elegant gowns. The maid looked around in surprise, realizing that she had never been in such a luxurious place before, where every detail screamed wealth. She turned to Ruvia and enthusiastically offered to help her choose a dress. Her voice was confident. Anything would suit her mistress, because anything would look stunning on her. However, Ruvia simply replied calmly that she didn't need any new clothes. This whole thing wasn't for her at all. The purchases were intended for Maria. The girl was stunned by this statement. She looked at her mistress in confusion, trying to figure out if she had heard wrong, and carefully asked if it was really so. Meanwhile, Ruvia approached the salesperson with a request to select for Maria several casual outfits, as well as a couple of formal dresses of the highest quality, without the slightest expense. The maid immediately noticed that all this was too expensive for her. She found it impossible to wear such expensive clothes, intended for people of a completely different status. But Ruvia calmly replied that she was doing this not for the maid's sake, but for her own. These words only further confused the girl. She had no idea what her mistress meant. Ruvia firmly stated that it irritated her when people judged her subordinates based solely on their appearance. She considered it unfair and refused to allow anyone to speak disparagingly of them. Now she found herself the only one so close to the mistress. However, she felt extremely awkward trying on all these outfits, despite their luxurious appearance and impeccable tailoring. By all appearances, she genuinely enjoyed it. Such a lively reaction was worth the time and money. The pleasure was clearly worth it. It was important to her that a person could experience such moments during life, because after death, all of this loses all meaning, and nothing matters anymore. While you can, you need to appreciate the moments spent with loved ones and enjoy them without putting off joy for later. The girl felt genuine gratitude toward her mistress. She promised to make even greater efforts to justify the trust placed in her. There was another store ahead, and the maid couldn't hide her surprise. How much money could they spend? She was amazed by their stamina and desire to continue shopping. When Ruvia returned to her room, she plopped down wearily on her bed, declaring that she was completely exhausted after a long day and couldn't go on any longer. All she wanted was to rest. She said she had to be away for 70 hours and she didn't know how to cope, as the time would be filled with numerous obligations and worries. The journey turned out to be long. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and Ruvia was puzzled, not understanding who it could be, especially at such a late time when everyone should have been resting. When the maid opened the door, she literally shuddered to see the prince standing there. It was unexpected, and the maid couldn't hide her fear, not understanding why he was there. The prince asked if Ruvia was a first-year student named Ruvia Ruxin. His voice was confident, and he clearly expected a specific answer, unaware of the emotions it would evoke in her. Ruvia, slightly taken aback, confirmed his words, replying that it was she. Then curiously, she asked who he was and what brought him to her room on such a night. The prince introduced himself as Orleans Lonhostia, and at that moment Ruvia realized he was the fourth prince. She was stunned, unable to believe her ears, thinking it was some kind of mistake. Ruvia couldn't believe he was really who she'd heard about. She could hardly resist the urge to ask again if she'd understood his idea correctly. The prince, in turn, bowed to her respectfully. This was unexpected, and Ruvia, still in disbelief, bowed her head in return, also introducing herself by her full name. Ruvia couldn't understand what the prince was doing in her room. She didn't want to meet him, but despite that, he came here himself, violating her privacy. He apologized for the lateness of his visit, explaining that as a village headman he could not ignore his duties, and that he had an important matter to attend to that could not be delayed. The prince noted that she had handled the situation well, but reports had come in that she had been seen gambling at the casino for large sums. He couldn't ignore this fact. The prince reminded her that such behavior constitutes an offense subject to punishment. He announced that she would be expected before the disciplinary committee the following morning for an investigation. And without waiting for an answer, he abruptly slammed the door behind him and left, leaving Ruvia in complete confusion and even greater bewilderment, not knowing what to do. The maid asked anxiously what they would do now. The mistress, without losing her composure, replied that sometimes you just have to accept things because such situations happen. The maid was astonished by her mistress's indifference. This was a disciplinary committee after all, and she didn't seem to care. This behavior astonished the maid. The mistress suggested they simply go to bed. Marie, a little alarmed, reminded them that school hadn't even started yet, and the punishment could be quite severe and unpleasant. Ruvia, lost in thought, remembered that at least she'd managed to spend money on necessary things. The problem was, she didn't know who could complain about her. At the moment, her main goal was to pass probation or obtain a temporary suspension from her classes. This would give her the freedom to do nothing legally. The class monitor announced that her punishment would be to have her mop the classroom floors. This was proposed as a measure to correct her behavior. The mistress remarked that this punishment seemed too lenient to her. She believed that something more serious and appropriate was needed for such actions. The prince, hearing this, asked in surprise if she really thought such a punishment was too light. He couldn't believe she was so critical. The lady firmly stated that she truly believed this. Despite her status, she felt that her behavior required far more serious consequences than simple punishment. She emphasized that he should give her probation or suspension from school so that the punishment would fit her offense. The prince noticed that Ruvia acknowledged her guilt and was willing to accept a just punishment. This was truly commendable. He couldn't help but appreciate her honesty in this matter. Ruvia declared that she didn't need any compliments. It had always been important to her to remain honest and unashamed. Her words confirmed her self-confidence and independence. The prince possessed the eyes of a contemplative, capable of seeing the essence of everything that was happening and of exposing any lie, no matter how subtle. This quality often irritated those around him. He knew that his ability to see the truth, to pierce masks, wouldn't help him discover her true nature. Ruvia was too cunning and adept at concealing her true thoughts. In any case, Ruvia was categorically against doing the cleaning. She decided a probationary period was the best solution. Working by the rules seemed much more reasonable to her. She believed that either suspension or expulsion were the best options. Cleaning was not something she cared about at all. The prince, noticing her firm conviction, asked if she truly preferred a more severe punishment. His interest was genuine, and he wanted to understand her point of view. Ruvia confirmed her words, and then the prince said that he had indeed chosen the cleaning for her. He believed it would be a reasonable solution in this situation. Regardless of what she had done, the prince believed that to apply too severe a punishment immediately upon her arrival would be overly cruel and unfair. Ruvia was certain his decision was due to her becoming his fiancée. She believed it was an act of excessive generosity on his part, though it could have been a mistake. The man noted that she had every right to think so, but in reality, his decision was based on the fact that their union was one of convenience, and it would be wrong to start with such a severe punishment. Ruvia realized this was unnecessary politeness on his part. She had her own affairs, and she believed that personal relationships and social obligations should be separated. Ruvia informed him that he should adhere to the Academy's established rules and punish her accordingly, as required by the charter. She believed that rules were important for discipline. To make other students understand how serious the consequences could be, she suggested a suspension as a punishment, which she believed would demonstrate strictness. The gentleman agreed with her proposal and stated that he would decide her punishment by suspending her for 5 days from all classes and participation in the life of the academy during this period. Ruvia quickly realized that these 5 days would give her complete isolation from the daily worries of the academy. She was fine with that, and she didn't particularly resent the decision. 5 days had passed, and she felt rested. This period had allowed her to gain strength, and now she wanted to take a short walk in the fresh air. 2 centuries ago, the situation here would have been completely different. The main building where it was located was destroyed by fire and then rebuilt using new technologies. Thinking back, Ruvia felt a slight sadness. It had been a pivotal moment in her life, and although much had changed, something inside her remained unchanged. Time had taken away much that was dear to her. Only her soul remained, filled with memories of the past, which she often carried in her thoughts, reflecting on days gone by. It was natural. Considering how many years had passed, time leaves its mark, and she understood that she needed to learn to let go of what could never be returned. Suddenly, A stone standing nearby caught her attention. Ruvia glanced at it and thought that this stone held important memories from her past. The stone, she recalled, was indeed the very one on which the children had left their inscriptions when the building was being constructed. Those words and the memories of them came alive in her mind. Ruvia remembered how she'd once angrily scolded her children for scratching a stone with a knife, but now, looking back, she felt only nostalgia and regret for those times. All the children Ruvia met in her past life had endured incredible hardships. Each of them had endured countless trials and experienced pain that was unbearable. She hopes that now that all this is behind them, they have found long-awaited peace. Perhaps they have found their inner strength and can finally put their suffering behind them. When she died, Ruvia's soul was immediately reincarnated in another body, that of a young girl. Less than a month passed before she regained her life, starting anew. Perhaps her death is now being actively discussed in the central part of the world, as she was a famous figure who left a noticeable mark. Her passing has undoubtedly become a topic of conversation. All those who tried to save her died one after another before her eyes. It was hard to watch, especially when they left, despite their efforts and hopes. She considered them fools, because she herself had long since given up on living. Everything was so painful that the thought of continuing to fight was alien to her. Ruvia decided she'd had enough. Replaying memories of her past life and constantly crying was pointless. Her soul had been crying out for peace for a long time, and she was already tired of it all. She promised herself she'd get some proper rest after all. She'd worked so hard. Now it was time for some well-deserved rest and recuperation, for a new chapter in her life. She noticed her, the girl who had fallen asleep under a tree, right under the very tree where she had once rested. Everything seemed so familiar and yet so new. Ruvia heard her master's voice asking her to sleep a little longer, noticing how tired she looked. He spoke calmly and solicitously, as if he knew her condition. When she opened her eyes, she saw the same guy she'd met at the casino standing there. He was right there, his gaze as intent as before. He acknowledged that they were meeting again, smiled, and called her lovely lady. It was unexpected, but there was a warmth in his words that made her feel important. Ruvia didn't say a word, but her silence spoke for itself. The man immediately realized that his appearance brought her no joy, quite the opposite. She calmly remarked that she had no particular desire to speak with those who were informing on her. There was no anger in her voice, but a cold undertone clung to her words. The man was deeply surprised. He couldn't even immediately find what to say, so unexpected was this turn of events in the conversation. Then he decided to ask how she knew it was he who had reported it. However, Ruvia calmly replied that she didn't know for sure, she just guessed. Her words stumped the man. He didn't know how to react. The meaning of her phrase eluded him, and his confusion only grew. Ruvia explained that she'd simply said it as a guess, but judging by his reaction, she'd been right. It really was him. Now everything fit. His words at the casino, this meeting, the circumstances, everything pointed to him. He was the prime suspect, even if he didn't realize it. The man noted with a bitter smile that she had outplayed him again. However, he asked her not to jump to conclusions and not to think too badly of him. After all, he was her teacher, albeit a temporary one, and so he couldn't turn a blind eye to the student's misbehavior. He only told her everything for her own good. A teacher who goes to a casino and cheats? It even sounded funny. Ruvia didn't continue the conversation. She felt it was time to return to her room. If he had nothing more to add, she asked him to leave. She wanted to get some sleep, and his presence was only interfering with it. The man sighed and said he was sorry. He was glad to see her again, even though she had turned out to be as heartless as he had thought. She didn't even ask who he was, but Ruvia calmly replied that she didn't see the need. She already knew everything. Ruvia addressed the young man with respect, calling him not only Prince, but also by his given name, which was unexpected in itself. There was no doubt or hesitation in her voice. Prince Wildheim froze, stunned to the core. He couldn't even immediately find what to say, so astonishing was this address. Collecting his thoughts, he asked how long she had known his name. Or perhaps she was simply guessing again, as she had done before, playing with words? After all, who else, possessing such a level of magic at such a young age, could teach if not he, the crown prince? This conclusion seemed the only logical one to him. The lady, however, simply smiled and greeted him reservedly, expressing her joy at their meeting. The young man, however, noted to himself that she wasn't at all surprised by the fact that he was the crown prince. She, in turn, clarified why this moment should surprise her at all. For her, it wasn't something out of the ordinary, but rather the natural state of affairs. If their meeting had taken place a month earlier, these circumstances would have forced him to bow in return. But times have changed, and now everything is different. Ruvia had seen a lot in her long life. Such things could no longer truly surprise her. They all seemed trivial compared to what she had experienced. Despite this unexpected encounter, she made it clear she had business to attend to. Ruvia remarked that she was undoubtedly flattered, but had to leave, not wanting to waste time on idle chatter. She was irritated by his persistent attention, and conversation with him seemed completely uninteresting. she frankly declared that she would prefer for him to simply leave her alone. However, as soon as she turned around, her ears caught an unexpected sound. The prince laughed. This made her turn and look at him with slight bewilderment. The young man, smiling openly, remarked that he had never before encountered such a fascinating and unusual person. There was something special about her, unlike anyone else. Ruvia merely chuckled at these words, and without false modesty, she noted that she was perfectly aware of her own attractiveness. However, looking at her interlocutor, she warned, falling in love with her was not the best idea. The crown prince didn't wipe the smile from his face and, tilting his head slightly, asked why she thought so. There was obvious interest in his voice, as if he were expecting to hear something unexpected. The lady merely frowned, not understanding where he was leading. It all seemed strange to her, even absurd. What was this man even talking about? The prince, oblivious to her bewilderment, remarked that she truly possessed incredible charm, and, in his opinion, it was simply impossible to avoid falling in love with such a woman. Perhaps he had already begun to develop special feelings for her. However, Ruvia, raising an eyebrow slightly, replied that the prince was completely inept at humor, but the man immediately assured her he was completely serious. There wasn't a hint of mockery in his voice, and this only heightened her wariness. Ruvia froze and said nothing more. She didn't know how to react. These words had thrown her off balance, and for the first time in a long time, she had no answer. The prince suddenly decided it was time to leave. He admitted it was an inopportune time to visit, but before he left, he wanted to give her a special gift. And, as if by chance, he added that Ruvia was the first person who had managed to interest him so much. A mysterious glimmer flickered in his eyes. Then, without waiting for her reaction, he cast magic. Ruvia immediately understood what he was doing. She had encountered similar spells before. Standard extraction magic takes everything an object contains, leaving behind an empty shell. But his technique was different. He only took the pollen from her clothes. Such precision in manipulating magic was astounding. It was truly astonishing, as even among mages such mastery was extremely rare. He was called the Grand Master of the Magic Tower, the Mage of the Black Constellation. And now Ruvia understood why. Having completed his task, he calmly said that was all. There was not a shred of doubt in his voice. He knew he had done everything right, and he hoped it had helped her. Before disappearing, he promised that their meeting would be far from their last, and for some reason, Ruvia had no doubt this was true. Ruvia remembered the look on his face when he'd asked that very question. Why shouldn't he fall in love with her? There was genuine confusion in his eyes, and it left her slightly irritated. Then she thought he was being too clingy, and it was becoming increasingly tiresome. His constant questions, his intense attention, and his relentless attempts to get closer were a heavy burden for her. Not only was the fourth prince already living at the academy, but now the crown prince was not far behind. His increased interest in her was causing unnecessary inconvenience and drawing unnecessary attention to her. Ruvia longed to finally be left alone. She didn't need intrigue or special attention from high-ranking officials. She simply wanted to live without unnecessary worries. Suddenly, her ears caught the sound of someone talking nearby. The voices were quite loud, which caught her attention. She couldn't help but listen, curious to hear what they were saying. It was a group of guys asking another young man about some cleaning job. Their questions sounded clearly confused, as if they themselves weren't quite sure what they were talking about. Ruvia assumed these boys had also received some kind of punishment, perhaps for breach of discipline or insolent behavior. Otherwise, why would they be involved in such things? They said the job was perfectly suitable for him, but they themselves were completely unsuited for such work. Their tone betrayed clear dissatisfaction and disapproval of the situation. They persistently tried to get an answer from him, wondering why he was silent. In their opinion, they looked nothing like cleaners, and this seemed extremely unfair. After a brief pause, the young man finally responded, admitting that perhaps they were right, and that such a job really wasn't right for them. However, his interlocutors didn't let up and continued questioning him. Hearing his words, the boys burst into laughter, noting that this was a very reasonable conclusion. Their laughter was loud and mocking, as if they had already known what conclusion he would reach. In their opinion, cleaning should be done by someone who really enjoys it. So without further ado, they thrust a mop into his hands, making it clear that this responsibility now fell on him. The boy sighed heavily and reluctantly agreed, declaring that since that was the case, he'd also do the cleaning. However, his voice clearly betrayed his displeasure with what was happening. When he paused for a moment, the boys immediately raised their voices, demanding that he answer. Their tone grew increasingly irritated, and they had no intention of leaving him alone. He looked down, knowing he had no other choice. A bruise already marked his face, reminding him that arguing with them was pointless. The lady approached from behind and, trying to speak calmly, asked if she was disturbing their conversation. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of curiosity in it, and her eyes were attentive. The boys turned around to see who had addressed them, and upon seeing the girl, they froze in place. Standing before them was Princess Ruvia Ruxin herself, an aristocrat who was impossible to miss. Realizing who they were dealing with, the young men immediately bowed their heads in respect. They politely greeted the lady, emphasizing her title, and then quickly introduced themselves, stating not only their names but also their year of study. The lady looked at them carefully and asked in a reserved tone what was going on. She knew that neither of the boys belonged to noble families and could boast of any prestigious background, but the situation still raised questions. The young men hastened to reassure her that nothing unusual was happening. They were simply doing their jobs and didn't want her to worry about trifles. They had nothing to hide, so there was no need to attach unnecessary significance to this conversation. However, the lady wasn't inclined to leave things as they were. She sighed deeply, realizing that if she simply left now, she'd be thinking about it for a long time. She wanted to deal with these unpleasant individuals as quickly as possible and leave this place. Her gaze shifted to the boy standing slightly behind her. Something about him caught her attention, and she asked him point blank what his name was. Expecting an immediate answer, the young man looked at her and quietly said his name, Basner. The princess frowned slightly, looking at him intently, and asked if he was sure of what he was saying and whether he truly understood the situation he was in. Then she repeated her question, but more firmly, more demandingly. Was he truly willing to leave things as they were and continue to put up with the situation he found himself in? These words made the boys tense. They exchanged glances, and their faces grew more serious. The thought of the situation getting out of control suddenly made them nervous. However, the lady didn't look away and addressed Basner directly. She pointed out that this role was being unfairly thrust upon him, while he simply stood by, as if he didn't understand what was being done to him. She made it clear that if he didn't start fighting for himself, nothing in his life would change. He would be forced to continue to endure humiliation until he decided to say enough. Her voice softened slightly, but it still held a note of urgency. She asked if he was okay with this, and if he intended to continue to put up with it. If he has even a shred of desire to change something, she's ready to help him, but he'll have to act on his own, and the choice is his alone. The lady warned that it wouldn't be easy. Finding courage is one of the most difficult challenges, and not everyone is capable of overcoming it. But perhaps that was pointless. She didn't know all the circumstances of his life and couldn't judge his best course of action. The lady apologized for interfering in the situation and acknowledged that she might have said too much. One of the guys chuckled and advised the princess not to waste her time on people like Basner. In his opinion, there was simply no point. Everyone was gossiping that this boy was the most cowardly person in their department. No one took him seriously, considering him a weakling. The mistress, hearing this, merely shrugged and indifferently remarked that perhaps that was true. The young man, hearing this, chuckled and, without further ado, said that this was precisely why he was going to clean up. He seemed in no hurry to argue or make excuses. But the lady merely grimaced in obvious disgust. Just the sight of them was unpleasant. Without a word, she demanded a bucket of water, picked it up, and without a second thought, splashed it directly on one of the boys. The drenched young man stood frozen in shock, his face a picture of utter shock. He couldn't believe what was happening and stuttered as he asked what the lady was doing. The lady, not paying attention to his shocked look, calmly replied that she was challenging him to a duel. The boy blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. His confusion amused the mistress, and she repeated the question with a hint of mockery. Was he really hard of hearing? She really was challenging them to a duel. Then, narrowing her eyes, she asked if they wanted to know why. The answer was simple. She just didn't like their faces. The boys were stunned by this. They exchanged glances, but no one knew how to react. The lady continued in the same tone. In her opinion, cleaning would suit them much better than the boy they were making fun of. So, the matter had to be settled once and for all. She offered a set of terms. Whoever lost would have to do the cleaning. In this duel, she would represent that cowardly guy. The lady's words sparked a storm of emotion. The boys, who had recently been lost, now became noticeably angry. One of them, plucking up his courage, sharply declared that she shouldn't joke like that. He reminded her that despite her status as a princess, he did not intend to allow anyone to mock the honor of a knight. The lady raised an eyebrow, as if doubting what she had heard, and asked again if he really doubted her words. After all, she's already made it perfectly clear. She simply doesn't like these people, and there couldn't be a better reason for a duel. Ruvia looked at the boy with a slight smile and, without flinching, challenged him. If he truly wasn't afraid, then let him raise his sword. No matter what happened, no one would hold them accountable. Besides, fighting them bare-handed would have been too cruel. In a generous gesture, she decided to use just a simple mop to even the odds a bit. One of the boys was already seething with anger. He felt this insolent mockery had crossed all boundaries. His face turned red, and he clenched his fists in irritation. Ruvia looked at him carefully and offered another condition. If they were in doubt, let them attack together. She would acknowledge their victory if they so much as touched the hem of her robe. The insulted boy couldn't bear it any longer and rushed at her with a scream, brandishing his sword. He was sure he would make her regret her words. But his efforts were in vain. Ruvia dodged with lightning speed, without even exerting much effort, her movements light and precise. She chuckled and remarked that he should have taken a real sword if he thought he had even the slightest chance of hitting her. Then, using a mop, she deftly parried his attack, causing him to lose his balance. He lost his footing and flew off with a loud noise. Her fighting style was characterized by precision and minimalism. She always acted preemptively, attacking quickly and economically, without wasted movement. The next moment, she not only seized the initiative, but also dealt him a sharp blow to the head, not giving him time to recover. The only thing that slightly upset Ruvia was the pain in her arm. She had to apply too much force, and now her joints ached unpleasantly. The boy wasn't about to give in so easily, however. He tried to strike back, but Ruvia easily parried the attack and hit him again with the mop. He fell again, and Ruvia noticed she'd already told her companions that they could attack together. The reminder was clear, as their strength clearly left much to be desired. Ruvia's body was weakened, and she struggled with the iron sword. However, despite her physical weakness, her martial arts skills allowed her to remain at the forefront of combat. Even if her opponents were 10 times stronger, her knowledge of combat techniques would give her the upper hand. One precise strike, and she could defeat them without losing control. If her opponents didn't possess magic, they wouldn't be able to defeat her. Ruvia understood this and was prepared for any eventuality, confident in her skill. One of the boys grabbed his sword and declared he wasn't finished yet. However, Ruvia only laughed, surprised that they dared to act so provocatively. The boys, irritated by her laughter, shouted at her to shut up and tried to attack her. But no matter what they did, it was all useless, and they couldn't cope with her courage. But suddenly something happened to her legs. Ruvia felt her strength begin to fade, and she froze, trying to figure out what had happened before she lost her balance. When one of the boys tried to hit her, Bosner shouted at them to stop. His voice was stern and commanding, causing them to pause for a moment in indecision. He firmly ordered them to stop, declaring that enough was enough and there was no point in continuing. He seemed outraged by their behavior, as if he considered their actions a mockery of himself. His voice was restrained, but there was a clear hint of anger in it. He demanded an explanation. How dare they attack a defenseless girl? Aren't they ashamed to use force against the weak? These words offended one of the boys. He narrowed his eyes in displeasure, frowning irritably. Weak? This girl didn't seem weak to him at all, and it angered him that someone thought that about her. With a challenge in his voice, he asked what Bosner would do if that didn't stop them. Did he really think mere words would make them change their minds? Bosner, without hesitation, issued the challenge. He declared that he was challenging Mule and Same to a duel. If he lost, he would offer the lady his sincere apologies without further ado. These words completely enraged the boys. They didn't even argue and immediately went on the attack, furiously attacking him, as if not wanting to give him a single chance to prepare. Despite the onslaught, the boy didn't flinch. He was determined. The lady, however, decided to remain on the sidelines, preferring to simply observe what was happening, trying to figure out who he was. She watched his every move carefully, amazed by his skill. How could a mere boy achieve such skill? His technique resembled the style of a first-class knight. But the question remained, if he was so strong, why did he allow himself to be treated like this? Why did he endure the ridicule instead of immediately showing his strength? Having dealt with the opponents, he quickly turned his attention to their condition. The lady, noticing this, ordered a first aid kit to be brought to help the wounded. Bosner immediately complied with the request, bringing everything necessary without further ado. The lady, meanwhile, carefully tended the wounds of the vanquished, showing unexpected concern. The guy even tried to get a word in, asking her to be a little more careful, but Ruvia immediately cut him off. She firmly told him to sit still and not move, because it would be quicker and easier that way. Then the boy, determined to understand her motives, cautiously asked why the mistress was doing this. However, Ruvia merely narrowed her eyes slyly and asked with a slight challenge, was there really something wrong with him? After all, she simply wanted to. They were all expected to spend the entire day reflecting on the principles of chivalry. It was important to reflect on honor, dignity, and true values, rather than simply repeating memorized phrases. True, no one was going to take this seriously. It was unlikely that any of them would delve deeply into the meaning of the chivalric code, but it was worth trying to steer their thoughts in the right direction. At that moment, Bosner, having made up his mind, turned to the lady and sincerely thanked her for her concern. He looked so touching that Ruvia couldn't help but feel as if the figure standing before her wasn't a man, but a cute little fawn. The thought that he looked like a deer escaped her lips before she even realized it. Realizing her mistake, Ruvia sighed inwardly. It seemed her emotions had overtaken her reason. To avoid embarrassing the guy, she quickly added that no thanks were required. She simply wanted to help, and so she did. Now he'd better get down to business and go clean up. But Bosner couldn't understand how he could just let it go. He was certain he had to repay her kindness, because a debt of honor was always due. Ruvia just chuckled and said the best thing he could do was stop pestering her with this talk. It was getting tiresome. But, noticing his seriousness, She asked whether he was really ready to do everything she asked. Bosner nodded confidently, confirming his words. Then Ruvia, narrowing her eyes, ordered him not to let others humiliate him anymore. After a short pause, she asked him directly what he was so afraid of. The reasons were unknown to her, but she saw one thing: he lacked self-confidence, and this needed to be changed. Sometimes even a whole lifetime is not enough to realize the obvious, and realization can come quite unexpectedly, at moments when you least expect it. Ruvia noticed the boy rubbing his eyes, as if chasing away the last of sleep or holding back tears. He looked at her gratefully, his voice sounding sincere. She caught a hint of confusion in his gaze. He stuttered a little as he promised that he would definitely listen to her words and remember everything she said. He thanked her again, this time even more deeply. His voice held the firm conviction that he would never forget what she had done for him that day. Ruvia felt the fatigue that had accumulated throughout the day. She needed a distraction, and the best way to do that was to go out into the city and enjoy some fried chicken and beer. Marie, sitting down at the table, noted with pleasure that she hadn't eaten anything so delicious in a long time. Every bite brought genuine pleasure, and she savored the moment. Suddenly, someone familiar approached her. The man, with a slight smile, remarked that fate had brought him and his mistress together again, as if deliberately arranging such encounters. These turned out to be the same guys who had claimed to have spent the morning cleaning the area. They looked pleased and were clearly happy to see each other. It seemed fate itself had decided that their paths would cross again. They invited her to join them, as if they believed it was meant to be. The maid watched them with slight bewilderment. They seemed a little strange to her, so she decided to find out who they were and what they wanted. The lady, after some thought, agreed. She'd heard that visitors were being paid today, and she saw no reason to turn down the opportunity. The maid noted to herself that these men looked like quite pleasant conversationalists, even with a certain amount of goodwill. However, the lady believed that her words were explained only by the fact that they paid the bill and nothing more. Still, she felt a little uneasy. She'd expected the worst, but it seems she'd been wrong. These people weren't as hopeless as she'd initially thought. They were having a good time over beers. After a few drinks, the guy suggested they continue by ordering another. The lady shook her head with a smile, declining. She felt she had already had enough to drink. But the guy, having settled himself comfortably, suggested it again. After all, they could drink another mug without rushing. The lady only warned them to relax as they pleased, but not to get drunk to the point of unconsciousness and not to cause trouble. The maid helped the lady out and asked worriedly if she was feeling well. The lady's body did not require so much alcohol, so stopping in time was the best decision. The air was already thick with the feeling of a new semester approaching. Bustle, new faces, a hint of tension. Looking at this picture, one involuntarily recalled the events that took place 200 years ago. Come to think of it, he'd always dreamed of creating a similar academy, brimming with knowledge and opportunity. It was his goal, but circumstances conspired to prevent him from realizing it. Despite this, he was different from everyone she knew. His actions, his character, his views, everything about him seemed unusual, unlike anyone else. In her memory, he remained special. After all, it was he who once changed her life, completely subjugating her. He became the one for whom she lived, whose ideals she followed, and whose orders she carried out without hesitation. Time passed, but even 10 years after his death, she remained faithful to his legacy. His will became her guiding star, guiding her through the years. It was only through this devotion that she fought for 10 long years, striving to fulfill his will, and in the end, she died, sharing her fate with others. She'd given herself entirely to this path, but the desire to see him again never faded. However, it was time to leave the past behind. She was now Ruvia Ruxin, and this life belonged solely to her. She was feeling particularly lazy today, and decided to rest a bit, but suddenly a maid entered the room with news. An invitation had arrived for her mistress. Ruvia sat up in surprise and asked if she'd heard right. However, the maid confidently repeated the invitation was indeed intended for her. It turned out that it was sent by Princess Sophine, a representative of the influential family of Duke Haynes. In her letter, the lady formally invited Princess Ruvia to a tea party personally hosted by Sophine of the Duke of Haynes' family. The invitation was written in an elegant handwriting, emphasizing respect and special attention to the addressee. However, Ruvia was genuinely puzzled by this invitation. She couldn't understand why Sophine had suddenly decided to invite her to such an informal event. After all, they had no common business or close acquaintance. The Duke of Haynes' family was considered one of the most influential, rivaling even the Ruxin family in importance. Therefore, Ruvia asked the maid with distrust if she had heard anything about Sophien, as such attention seemed suspicious to her. Marie, her faithful servant, quickly replied that Sophien was more than just another girl from a noble family. She was incredibly famous, among the most respected figures among those admitted to the academy, and attracting much attention. Moreover, Sofian ranks second among all girls in both beauty and academic achievement. Her appearance is admired, and her knowledge and social graces only add to her popularity. The girl is not only educated but also has a good-natured disposition, and her descent from a noble family only enhances her influence. Many dream of becoming her friend, as associating with such a person opens many doors in high society. They say that first-year girls, in particular, try their best to win her favor. Becoming her friend means securing a higher status among their peers and the support of an influential family. However, Ruvia, hearing all this, merely frowned thoughtfully. Without another word, she indifferently ordered Marie to throw away the invitation, attaching no significance to it whatsoever. The maid was taken aback by her mistress's reaction. Unable to believe her ears, she asked again if she had understood correctly. After all, such an invitation was a great honor, and refusing it would have been impolite. But Ruvia remained adamant. What tea party? She had absolutely no desire to participate in such events, and in her opinion, the invitation simply wasn't worth it. Marie, however, wasn't about to give up so easily. She noticed with alarm that the invitation had been sent by none other than the princess herself, and throwing it away was simply unthinkable. The maid again cautiously asked Ruvia if she was sure of her decision. However, she yawned lazily and said her plans for today were much simpler. She intended to sleep. When the entrance ceremony arrived, Marie couldn't resist asking again if the lady had changed her mind and was still planning to attend the tea party. But Ruvia, as before, lay in bed, enjoying her rest, and calmly replied that she was quite comfortable here and that she did not intend to get out of bed. She casually remarked that she wasn't feeling well, meaning she couldn't go even if she wanted to. That was her final answer, not up for discussion. However, Marie, watching her, shook her head doubtfully. Her mistress looked perfectly healthy, and there was clearly no reason to refuse. But Ruvia only grinned and replied with lazy grace that she was, of course, ill and also incredibly beautiful. The maid informed her that there would be an open house at the social club that afternoon. She suggested that the lady might be interested in attending the event, as it attracted influential people and offered a good opportunity to make useful connections. However, the lady immediately made it clear that such gatherings did not appeal to her. She preferred to have a few sincere friends rather than be surrounded by hypocrites who merely feign friendliness, concealing their true intentions behind a mask of politeness. The maid was visibly upset, as her mistress not only avoided social events but even skipped classes. She was about to say something, but at that moment there was an unexpected knock at the door, interrupting their conversation. The mistress didn't rise from her seat and, without changing her expression, ordered the maid to see who had arrived. Marie, clearly displeased by the sudden visit, reluctantly headed for the door, sighing irritably as she went. An elegant woman with golden hair stood at the door. She introduced herself with dignity and said she had been sent by House Haynes. Her purpose was to meet Princess Ruvia in person, and she hoped she would find time to meet her. The lady leisurely approached the stranger in the dining room. Her voice was calm but filled with hidden indifference. She introduced herself, making it clear that she was Princess Ruvia, and then asked directly what business the guest had. The woman explained that she represented the House of Haynes and had come on an official mission. She respectfully handed over a letter containing an invitation to an important event, the inaugural party hosted by the House of Haynes. In addition to the letter, the woman also conveyed a personal message from her mistress. It stated that Mrs. Haynes was very much looking forward to Princess Ruvia's attendance and had even reserved a special seat for her at the upcoming reception. Ruvia, without seeming particularly interested, asked me to convey her gratitude for the invitation. However, she replied that, unfortunately, she had to decline as she was ill and would not be able to attend. The woman from House Haynes, hearing the refusal, sank to her knees in horror. Her voice was filled with desperation as she pleaded that Princess Sofian had ordered her to gain Ruvia's consent at any cost. Ruvia looked closely at the woman and noticed that she was trembling and her eyes were brimming with tears. She decided to check whether she would really be punished if she didn't accept the invitation. Judging by her reaction, her guess was correct. In response, the maid, her voice pleading, confirmed that if Ruvia refused, her mistress would be angry, threatening her with severe punishment. At that moment, Ruvia realized that behind this invitation was none other than Princess Sofian, known for her treacherous nature. She glanced at Marie and mockingly asked her if she hadn't claimed Princess Sofian had a good nature. It was now clear that things were quite different, and this meeting could cause her far more trouble than it's worth. The maid remarked that she'd heard other servants say her mistress possessed a noble and gentle nature. Ruvia responded with a slight smile that, if that's how it seemed, she was kindness personified. Then she calmly said that she understood everything and asked me to tell the princess that she would definitely come. There was no surprise or doubt in her voice, as if this were the most ordinary thing. The maid immediately began to bow deeply, expressing her sincere gratitude for her mistress's acceptance of the invitation. Her voice clearly conveyed joy and relief. Having calmed down a bit, the maid cautiously asked Ruvia what to do now, as this invitation could have consequences. Her gaze betrayed concern. Ruvia merely replied calmly that they had no choice now. They could only go and see what kind of celebration the princess had planned. Her words betrayed a hint of interest. The maid, a little surprised, asked if the mistress understood that this was not, in fact, an ordinary reception, but an invitation to a duel in the Swedish circle, where the rules were far from simple. This is a place where true predators lurk behind refined smiles and elegant speeches. Every step here requires caution, as an attack could strike at any moment. However, Ruvia merely replied with a grin, even curious to see how charming the princess would be in such a dangerous environment. A hint of mockery crept into her voice. The maid asked again if her mistress was sure it was a good idea to go there. Her tone betrayed doubt, as the undertaking could be dangerous. Ruvia, without a hint of hesitation, assured him she was absolutely certain. Then, suddenly changing the subject, she asked the maid if she really thought she was ugly. Maria, slightly embarrassed, replied that the lady was, of course, beautiful in her own way, but in this society many people pay great attention to appearance and clothing. Princess Sophia's final dress, the one she wears at the academy, is noticeably different from the others. It's far more richly embellished, its fabric is expensive, and the embroidery is delicate and exquisite. Even her mistress's attire seems modest in comparison. Ruvia, observing the maid's efforts, merely shook her head. She calmly remarked that it was just a simple gathering and there was no need to overdress. What was most important was a person's inner world, not outward show. After all the preparations, they set off for the party. The carriage quickly took them there. The journey took very little time, and soon they were standing at the entrance, ready to go inside. They were met by a butler who greeted the guests politely. He immediately pointed out the path the princess should take to reach the main hall, where the guests were already gathering. As Ruvia entered, her gaze swept across the room filled with noble ladies. Among them, she spotted a pink-haired girl. Apparently, almost all the Academy's influential figures were gathered here. This meeting confirmed her suspicions. The red-haired girl standing among the guests was Princess Sophian. Now Ruvia had no doubt about her identity. She had already assumed the princess would appear here, but now, seeing her only confirmed her thoughts. Everything was logical, and the meeting was inevitable. Approaching, Ruvia politely introduced herself, expressing her pleasure at meeting Princess Ruxin. She observed all the rules of etiquette, demonstrating respect. The lady introduced herself in return. The red-haired princess smiled and remarked that she had long wanted to establish a friendly relationship with Ruvia, but had never had the opportunity. But now, finally, she had the opportunity, and she was genuinely delighted. In response, Ruvia thanked him for the invitation, expressing her appreciation for the honor. Princess Sophian smiled and invited Ruvia to follow her. Her manner remained graceful and her voice was kind, creating an atmosphere of politeness and friendliness. Then she mentioned that several of the invited girls had suddenly fallen ill and wouldn't be able to come. This was a complete surprise to her, and she still couldn't believe the coincidence. The princess hoped they would show up later, but for now she offered Ruvia the empty seat. It seemed the best, so there was no doubt about the choice. For the red-haired princess, Ruvia was the only one worth worrying about. They were of equal status, which meant she became Sophian's main rival. If she could make Ruvia look bad, she could gain influence among the entire secular retinue of the academy, thereby strengthening her position. But to Ruvia, her plan seemed too predictable. Everything the princess tried to come up with seemed banal and unoriginal, like a repeat of a tired script. She hadn't even expected there to be so many such cuties at the academy, seeking power through intrigue. She found it all amusing and slightly tiresome. Ruvia sat alone, but her maid was at her side. There was a cheerful atmosphere all around, people laughing and having fun, but Ruvia felt completely outside of all the noise. She thought that the ladies gathered here were trying their best to please the woman who stood out from the crowd, but in reality it didn't really matter to her. While others try to please, there are those who prefer to remain on the sidelines, not interfering, simply observing what is happening, trying not to become the center of attention. The party was absolutely incredible, and Ruvia sarcastically remarked on how much fun everyone was having because she found it uninteresting and boring. She would have preferred something else. The mistress couldn't figure out what to do. Maybe she should punish this woman, put her in her place, and take away all the attention she was attracting. But so what? But Ruvia wasn't sure if she should do it at all. Her thoughts were all jumbled up, and her desires seemed at odds with what was happening around her. All she really wanted was for no one to touch her, for her not to be disturbed, and for the rest of the fuss not to concern her personal preferences and desires. Suddenly, Ruvia lifted her leg and placed it on the table, which left the maid confused. She couldn't understand what her mistress had decided to do. It seemed strange. But Ruvia, deciding her time for fun had arrived, decided not to hold back. She stood up pretentiously and did what she wanted, succumbing to the moment and without regard for the consequences. At that moment, she had no intention of holding back. With such a spirit, she threw the table toward Princess Sophian, causing surprise among everyone present. Everyone turned to look at Princess Sophian and the scene. Ruvia couldn't help but notice how the table suddenly fell, drawing everyone's attention to the scene. Ruvia, trying to pretend that nothing unusual had happened, said with an innocent expression, "How strange. I don't understand why this happened. Apparently the table wasn't very good." After reflecting on what had happened, Ruvia decided it was time for a change of scenery. She began looking for a new place, far away from everyone, so she could continue her stay in this strange place. Ruvia noticed Jane sitting at the table and happily said she was pleased to see her friend. She smiled, approaching and looking at the girl with respect. However, Jane became very angry. She sharply retorted that her name wasn't Jane, but Jeanette. The girl was displeased and didn't understand why Ruvia had called her that. Ruvia, still in good spirits, remarked that she was still very pleased to see Janet. She wasn't offended by this behavior and was in a friendly mood. Janet tried to explain that Tanya should come to her, but Ruvia asked her to repeat it, emphasizing that she hadn't quite understood her request. She did it all with a smile. Ruvia pinned Janet's feet with a chair, asking her if she really didn't want the mistress to come over. She also clarified that if she had anything to say to Ruvia, she should say it. After this, Janet immediately corrected herself. She acknowledged her mistake and said Ruvia could sit next to her. The girl was glad to see her again and offered her a seat with a smile. Ruvia, curious about her companion's drink, asked her what she had chosen. Janet replied that it was white tea and explained why she liked it. Ruvia noticed that it was probably the cream cake she'd been offered. Janet liked that kind of sweet, but Ruvia thought it was too bland and tasteless. Princess Sophien's face was filled with displeasure. She couldn't hide her displeasure and asked Ruvia what she was even doing at this event. Ruvia told the princess that since it was her party, she should point out that such a tasteless cake shouldn't be served to guests. It was important for the atmosphere. Ruvia expressed doubt, asking if the princess would say she was wrong in her remark. She waited for Sophien to respond to her comment. Sophien didn't hesitate and quickly stood up, demanding that Ruvia stop making such remarks. She was clearly ready to defend her taste preferences. But it was too late. Ruvia grabbed the cake and threw it on the floor. It was a flamboyant gesture that stunned everyone at the party. Everyone in the room was shocked. The cake shattered into pieces, and Ruvia noted with regret that this was truly unfortunate. Everything ended up on the floor again. Ruvia noted that under these circumstances, continuing the tea party wouldn't be the best idea. The atmosphere clearly didn't lend itself to further discussion. It's a shame the lady thought Sophien was probably enjoying herself. Apparently, her opinion was very different from what actually happened. The princess was clearly furious. She couldn't contain her emotions any longer and loudly asked what Lady Ruvia was doing. Confusion and anger were clearly evident in her voice. Ruvia had such a funny expression on her face that the princess clearly couldn't figure out what to say. All of this made it clear that Ruvia had made the right choice. The princess had already started screaming that she couldn't turn a blind eye to all this. She was furious and had no intention of putting up with such behavior. Ruvia decided that since she'd already started, she might as well have some real fun. She picked up the cake and threw it at the painting, narrowly missing Princess Sophia as it flew past. The princess was completely shocked. She couldn't believe that her mistress had noticed how unpalatable the cake was and had decided to throw it away. This shocked her even more. Ruvia didn't notice the princess standing right in front of her and apologized for the accident. She still didn't realize how close she had come to disaster. Then the lady noticed another cake sitting nearby and decided to pick it up to check it out. Her eyes were already blazing with excitement, ready for more action. Ruvia glanced at the chocolate cake. Sophien was simply shocked and asked what she was going to do with it, clearly not expecting anything good. The lady noted with surprise that the cake seemed strange. It seemed delicious, but something about it was off. This confused her, but she decided to investigate. Ruvia debated whether to throw it out or keep it. She couldn't decide whether to continue experimenting with this cake or get rid of it. Ruvia curiously inquired about the princess's response to all this. She couldn't help but notice her reaction and awaited her answer with interest. Princess Sophien begged Ruvia not to do this, the tension evident in her voice. She clearly didn't want the situation to get out of control. Mrs. Ruvia noted that, frankly, she too didn't want to do any of what was happening. But still, her thoughts were full of doubts, and she continued to ponder. Despite this, Ruvia continued to ponder what to do. She couldn't decide whether to give in to the princess's request or continue with the steps she had begun. Princess Sophien shouted at Ruvia not to throw the cake away, insisting it was truly delicious. Her voice was so insistent that it was hard to resist. The princess was so determined, she was ready to eat the cake herself. Ruvia, hearing her, grinned, sensing that the situation was becoming even more interesting. Ruvia asked the princess if she could find a secluded place where she could be alone and think quietly. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She needed privacy. The princess, a little surprised, asked again, "What did the mistress mean?" Ruvia explained that she wanted to sort out the cake that hadn't turned out well and talk to her alone. The princess, noticing the concern on Ruvia's face, sensed something was troubling her. She hesitantly agreed and offered to take her to another room for some peace and quiet. Soon they found themselves in an empty room, finally alone together. Here Ruvia could quietly reflect and discuss what was bothering her without prying eyes. The princess couldn't understand what exactly Ruvia was trying to achieve. She found it strange that she wasn't being overt about her role, yet she sensed something more was hidden behind her actions. Ruvia confidently stated that she believed the princess thought she would forgive everything that had happened. But Ruvia couldn't say for sure how things would play out. Everything was unclear. However, she was certain the cake wasn't destined to be a success, and the situation itself didn't bode well either. Ruvia clearly knew how it would end, though she remained a mystery to others. The princess couldn't understand what her mistress was doing. Why had she started all this? Ruvia asked what exactly she was thinking and was ready to hear the princess's opinion on the matter. The lady, still dissatisfied, emphasized that she felt the princess should have asked these questions, not she. It was clear in her eyes that she hadn't expected such treatment. Ruvia, for her part, insisted she'd done nothing worthy of discussion, but it was clear the princess had tried to humiliate her, which was completely unacceptable. The princess recalled that the family motto of House Haynes was, "To not turn away from injustice, to not tolerate it." These words undoubtedly held great meaning for her, and she always adhered to them. The princess said the mansion they were staying in was purchased by her duke immediately after she entered the academy. This was an important step, confirming her status in society. Ruvia thought wryly that the princess was obviously genuinely proud of her status, and that couldn't help but please her. However, she couldn't understand why she had to listen to all this. The princess grew angry and loudly declared that she would make her mistress regret her words. This promise sounded decisive and promising, and her face expressed confidence that she would achieve her goal. Ruvia kept her composure and asked with a smile how exactly the princess intended to fulfill her promise. She was prepared for any surprises, but remained calm and confident. The princess declared that her first step would be to ensure that no one from high society would speak to her mistress. This was an important step in achieving her goal. Ruvia smiled, noting that she finally understood what the princess was trying to achieve. This statement delighted her greatly, and she was prepared for what was to come. The princess, not understanding what exactly was meant, asked again what the cloud had been. She was confused and hadn't quite followed her mistress's train of thought. The lady confidently replied that her true goal was precisely this: to deprive the princess of social contact. Everything that had happened so far was merely part of this plan. The princess, feeling threatened, declared that she must not be underestimated. She was prepared to do everything to deprive Ruvia of her place in high society, intending to give her no chance. Ruvia, flushed with excitement, smiled and happily replied that this was exactly what she'd expected. She wasn't shocked by the threats. On the contrary, she saw them as confirmation of her expectations. Sophie looked furious, her expression laced with anger. She couldn't believe her mistress continued to treat her like this, feeling her patience wearing thin. Ruvia sighed and asked why the princess didn't believe her words. She'd repeated it so many times, but nothing seemed to change, and Sophie wasn't taking her seriously. The princess was in no mood to believe Ruvia's words, and she wasn't interested in them at all. She didn't understand why she should trust those who might be hostile or incomprehensible to her. Ruvia refused to lose patience and pressed on. She emphasized that if the princess didn't start listening to her, she would soon find herself in an even more difficult situation. Despite everything, Ruvia thought that there was nothing wrong with being a little late sometimes if it gave her the opportunity to act more decisively and thoughtfully. She began naming famous ladies, noting that the princess must know them. Ruvia knew these names were familiar, and she intended to make sure. Ruvia added that the princess must remember these girls, judging by her reaction. It was a significant moment that could have dispelled all doubts had the princess decided to take it seriously. Ruvia said all these girls fell victim to her cunning manipulation, which led to tragic consequences. For example, Jane was in an accident, and her life changed. As a result of all these events, Jane became close to a guy who, as it turned out, Princess Sophie liked. This was unexpected and unpleasant for her, as she had long had a crush on him. Laviolia lost her position, and the reason was so trivial she couldn't even remember it. Sienna, meanwhile, was ruined, and the princess used her house's influence to achieve it. The princess was shocked and couldn't understand how her mistress had learned of these events. She was terrified and didn't believe it was true. Ruvia, in turn, asked with interest why she had such an expression on her face. Sophie couldn't believe what Ruvia had said was true. She was skeptical, believing it was just a fabrication. Her expression expressed dissatisfaction and doubt. Ruvia turned to the princess and warned her that all these rumors she had just concocted could generate great interest among others. This could be dangerous for her reputation. She expressed concern that if someone unscrupulous learned of such rumors, they could spread and impact Sophie's future. This could pose a serious threat. Ruvia added that if the truth came out, it could be even more unpleasant and disgusting, with new details no one expected to hear. It was very risky. Ruvia asked in surprise if the princess was truly having trouble understanding what was happening. Apparently, she needed to be more direct so that the princess would finally understand the threat. She noticed that the princess seemed to suggest that they pretend they didn't know each other to avoid repercussions. It was one way out of the difficult situation. Ruvia assured the princess that if she did as she proposed, Sophian would remain in her place as the queen of social circles without being exposed to unnecessary dangers. Ruvia added with a smile that she would be like a sloth, enjoying life peacefully. This suited her. She wasn't worried about the consequences, believing everything would work out. She declared that the mistress must now leave, and the princess, in turn, must carefully consider her words. This was the final warning, and much depended on it. Ruvia slammed the door without turning around. The princess was left completely bewildered, unsure what was happening or what she should do about it. Hearing the princess's cry, Ruvia calmly left, slightly overreacting. She knew she could have softened her stance, but she chose not to compromise. She thought it was sometimes better to be unscrupulous and cruel so that people wouldn't try to get close to her. This helped keep them at a distance and avoid suspicion. Ruvia was confident that the money spent on all this had been worth it. Now she finally found peace, as all her actions and decisions had led to the desired result. Before the tea party, the mistress decided to do a little digging into the past and turned to the guild, which held a wealth of information. She was ready to learn everything. She spent almost all her resources buying information about Princess Sophian. She needed this information to protect herself and understand what was happening around her. The lady was almost certain her decisions were correct. She understood perfectly well that she had acted preemptively to avoid putting herself in jeopardy. Snowflake announced that a new invitation had arrived. The invitation stated that in 3 days there would be a celebratory banquet for the freshmen, organized in honor of Ms. Ruvia, and her presence was mandatory. Just as Ruvia had gotten rid of one problem, new difficulties arose again. She didn't expect the situation to escalate again, and she'd have to deal with the issues all over again. The letter clearly stated that the banquet was dedicated to the first-year students, and the lady's presence was mandatory. This was important, and she had to prepare for the event. The mistress asked Maria to throw away the invitation. The maid was shocked and couldn't understand how she could miss such an important event as the entrance ceremony. This time, in her opinion, Ruvia simply had to go. Ruvia calmly replied that she didn't want to attend the banquet. Her health didn't allow her to participate in such events, and she preferred not to risk them, as such events were detrimental to her well-being. She declared that she had no intention of interrupting her vacation with such events, and it would be better if she were left alone. At that moment, there was a sudden knock at the door, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. The mistress was still lying on the sofa when the maid heard someone asking if the mistress was there. This was unexpected, and Ruvia immediately became wary, unsure who could have come to see her. Ruvia was angry. She couldn't understand who had come to disturb her again at such an inopportune moment. Fear and discontent filled her, as she hadn't expected anyone that day. The maid suggested that perhaps they had come because of the incident at the mansion, and Ruvia would now have to pay for her persistence and decisions. She was prepared for unpleasant consequences. However, the lady replied that it was definitely not related to this incident and ordered Maria to meet the guests. She was confident that nothing serious had happened and decided not to worry unnecessarily. When Maria opened the door, she saw a knight standing on the threshold. This took her by surprise, and she was astonished that someone dressed like that would come to see her mistress. The knight inquired if Lady Ruvia lived there. He had no idea who exactly he was looking for, but his question seemed quite formal and serious. Marie questioned the knight, wondering what had brought him here. She wanted to understand why this man, who clearly belonged to some important guard, was in their home. Then the lady realized that before her stood a knight bearing the coat of arms of the Western Imperial Guard, renowned for its honor and strength. This insignia spoke of the knight's high status, which alarmed her. She couldn't understand why he had come to her, or what he wanted. She whispered to Marie to tell the knight that her mistress was not at home, hoping that would distract him. Marie explained to the knight that her mistress was indeed absent. She clarified that she was not deceiving him, and that her mistress was currently absent. The knight seemed to accept her words, but continued to wait. After some time, the lady finally appeared, determined to find out if this knight had any important business that required her attention. She approached and calmly inquired about his intentions. The knight greeted the princess and introduced himself as Lonson, a knight of the Imperial Guard. He spoke with respect and confidence, emphasizing his high status and his mission. Lonson explained that he was here on behalf of the Crown Prince himself. The lady, slightly surprised, immediately became interested in what exactly this prince needed and why he had chosen her. The knight informed her that her Imperial Majesty had sent her a gift. He spoke calmly but with noticeable respect for her position, expecting her to accept his offer. The knight explained that the gift was sent in honor of his mistress's admission to the academy. After his words, a servant brought an exquisite dress, the splendor of which immediately caught her attention. The maid was completely shocked, as she had never seen such beautiful and expensive dresses. Every detail was executed with extraordinary care and sophistication, which astounded her. The knight added that His Imperial Highness hoped that the lady would have a pleasant time at the festive banquet being held in honor of the first-year students, where she would receive special attention. Ruvia wondered what this knight could possibly mean by such an offer. She decided not to accept the gift, as her intuition told her it was some kind of deception. The lady explained that due to a severe migraine, she would be unable to attend the banquet and therefore gratefully declined the gift. She asked that her thanks for the thoughtfulness be conveyed. Ruvia stood up, feeling her condition worsen. She asked them to leave, as she needed to rest. Her illness was already tormenting her, and she couldn't afford to entertain guests. The knights tried to insist, explaining that she must accept the gift, but the lady would not listen. She made it clear that she had no need of his services and did not wish to violate her principles. They conveyed that the prince had also asked for a letter to be delivered to her. The knight made no secret of his concern, but the lady merely nodded, not expecting the letter to be important. The lady was surprised to receive a letter from the crown prince. She opened it, immediately noticing the unexpectedness of the message, but decided to read it anyway to understand what was required of her. In the letter, the crown prince stated bluntly that refusing the gift was impossible. He insisted that she simply accept the dress without asking any questions, otherwise the consequences would be immediate. The prince wrote that he was confident in her health and, in his opinion, her migraine was not real. He noted that they would definitely meet at the banquet and would be glad to see her among the guests. The lady didn't understand what was happening or why the prince was behaving this way. She was becoming increasingly confused. The knights, however, didn't wait for an answer, left the dress and wished her a speedy recovery. Ruvia wondered how quickly they'd managed to discard the dress and leave. She was surprised at how calmly they'd left her, leaving her wondering what it all meant. Marie remarked that the crown prince was a true romantic, having sent her such a beautiful dress. She considered it a gesture of great thoughtfulness, even if there was some hidden agenda behind his actions. The lady replied that she felt no sympathy for the prince despite his attentions. She was certain his feelings were not sincere and his actions had ulterior motives. The maid objected, saying that was not the case. She immediately sensed that the crown prince was an incredibly charming person and could not have been more delighted by his attention. Ruvia said the dress was beautiful, but at the same time, she was disgusted by the gift itself. The prince's gesture, in her opinion, was too impudent and inappropriate for the occasion. The lady thought that sending the dress before the banquet meant that the prince expected her to accept his invitation and appear at the event, despite all her doubts. Marie also noticed that it was a kind of courtship, as the prince said she was very charming and perhaps already beginning to fall in love with her. She couldn't understand why he was acting this way. The lady couldn't believe these words were sincere. Her experience told her that such statements were merely manipulation, not expressions of genuine feelings. She remembered the prince as a master strategist, and she understood that he wasn't doing anything without a reason. It was all part of his plan to gain her attention and manipulate her. The lady couldn't understand why this man, who played such complex games, would waste his time courting a girl he didn't even know. This was becoming increasingly irritating to her. Ruvia firmly told the maid to throw away the dress and the letter. She wanted nothing to do with the gift and refused to accept it despite its cost and splendor. The maid was outraged by this decision. She couldn't understand how anyone could throw away such an expensive gift, which she considered a symbol of attention and care. The lady insisted the gift was not only an unwanted reminder of the prince, but also a symbol of manipulation. She ordered the dress burned and the entire area sprinkled with salt to remove it. The maid tried to persuade her mistress to reconsider. She believed this could be the first step toward destiny, an opportunity not to be missed, and insisted that she accept the gift. But Ruvia wouldn't listen. She said the only reason the maid didn't want to throw the dress away was its high cost, but that didn't matter to her. Marie remarked that it wasn't the cost of the dress that was the issue, but rather that the lady was being too ungrateful. She couldn't understand why Ruvia didn't appreciate such attention, given that the prince was clearly trying. However, she couldn't help but notice that the crown prince, while trying, was far more sincere in his efforts, unlike the fourth prince, who had been disappointing in his courtship attempts. Ruvia thought that, despite all the attention from the crown prince, she was already tired of such displays of interest. If the fourth prince started paying attention to her, it would be too much. The maid expressed her dissatisfaction with the fourth prince. He showed no interest in her mistress and made no effort to win her attention. This greatly disappointed her. She expressed dissatisfaction that such a beautiful and magnificent woman as the mistress shouldn't pay attention to this fool who couldn't understand her value. At that moment, there was an unexpected knock at the door. The man who appeared on the threshold was a servant sent by the fourth prince. He had called the mistress to tell her something important and stood there, awaiting her reaction. The maid was frightened, unsure what this could mean. She couldn't understand how they knew her mistress was speaking ill of the prince. Thoughts of the possible consequences were already creeping into her head. Ruvia calmly told the maid to calm down. She decided she would open the door herself and sort out the situation, not wanting to panic or make unnecessary assumptions about what was happening. Opening the door, she saw a servant who immediately greeted her with respect. He politely waited for his mistress to listen to him and perhaps answer his requests. Ruvia asked what he needed and immediately made it clear she was willing to listen to what had happened. She was prepared to understand the situation, taking her time making decisions so as not to make mistakes. The man informed her that the fourth prince had sent her a gift. He explained that it was a sign of respect for her acceptance into the academy, and that it was time for him to leave. The maid immediately recognized the gift's nature, seeing its silhouette immediately revealing its origin. She sensed that there was some hidden agenda behind the gift. The man added that the prince wished her a good rest. The wish was polite, but it couldn't conceal his true purpose, to attract the lady's attention. The lady sighed, but Marie was simply delighted. She already knew that the prince couldn't ignore her, and was ready to do anything to prove his attention and care. Marie was certain the fourth prince was the best of them all. His actions, though strange, were a sign of his interest, and she admired his determination. Ruvia couldn't understand what was wrong with them. Why had both princes, each in their own way, sent her such dresses at the same time? It seemed too strange and out of place. She understood that the crown prince, though he tried, was still more sincere. The fourth, in her opinion, showed no real interest in her and was now only reminding her of his presence. It seemed he wanted to remind her that he was, after all, her fiancé. Before he'd acted as if he weren't interested in her at all, but now, with this gesture, he was trying to get her attention. Ruvia suspected he might be acting this way because of the attention the middle prince was now showing, but whatever the reason, she decided she would not participate in this strange triangle. The mistress ordered the maid to burn both dresses, wanting nothing to do with them. She was certain this was the best way to end this attention. The maid tried to object, saying that her mistress was going to a banquet and that she might need the dresses, but Ruvia was adamant. Her decision was unquestionable. The maid couldn't understand how such expensive gifts from princes could be thrown away. It was too wasteful, and she couldn't accept such cruelty towards things of such importance. The lady agreed that throwing away the dresses would be too foolish. She decided it would be best to burn them, to forget about the gifts and bring this stage of her life to an end. Ruvia decided she could profit from these dresses. She knew she wouldn't wear them, but she could use them as a means to improve her financial situation. She decided to sell both dresses and received 4,000 for both. This was exactly the amount she expected, as the items were truly high quality with impeccable workmanship. The money could have been spent on essential household expenses, and Ruvia felt she had made the right choice. Maria was shocked to learn that she had received such a sum for 2 dresses. The lady asked again if she was really sure she should sell them. She was seeking confirmation of her decision, to ensure it was the right move in this situation. Marie didn't understand what the mistress was talking about and felt a little embarrassed. She couldn't tell if the mistress was making fun of her or if she really was planning to do something so strange with the gifts. Afterwards, they went to lunch, and the maid, although she could not fully understand what had happened, still noted that this was not the worst option that could have been chosen in such a situation. She noticed that in many popular novels, the protagonist often declines gifts, as if demonstrating her independence and integrity. This added interest to her character. The maid thought it wasn't all about money. For her mistress, it was simply a way to find the perfect encounter with love, as often happened in the books she read. Even without reading such novels, the mistress intuitively acted like their heroines. Everything she did seemed meticulously planned, and the maid thought the mistress a true genius. Marie noted that steak is indeed delicious at any time of day, regardless of whether it is morning or evening, and could very well be an excellent addition to any meal. She also noticed that it seemed someone was already waiting at the door for the mistress. Someone was persistently prepared and seemed to have been expecting her appearance for quite some time. As they came closer, the maid whispered that there was probably some attractive young man standing behind the door, who had attracted her attention with his appearance. The lady immediately realized that this was the same boy she had once called Little Fawn. He was inconspicuous, but he left a trace in her memory. Although she couldn't remember his name, the guy was the first to introduce himself, which left her with a pretty clear impression of his manners. It turned out to be Basner, and he greeted the lady with a sincere smile, asking how she was feeling and how her time had gone, whether she had had any problems. The lady, smiling, replied that everything was fine with her, but immediately asked what exactly had brought him to this moment, what he wanted to tell her or convey. She noticed that his aura had changed, and he said with confidence that he had come to thank her for the incident that had become significant and important for him. Although she knew she should say that there was no need to thank her, she felt that it was difficult for her to say these words. Something was preventing her from fully expressing her thoughts. Sighing, she said that she really just wanted to help, and did so he shouldn't worry or be too concerned about the situation. The guy, despite her words, still insisted that this was very important to him, and although she claimed that there was no need to worry, this was a difficult situation for him. He wanted to do something worthy that could properly thank her for her help and kindness, assuring her that his intentions were sincere. The lady, interested, agreed and asked what he had come up with, what exactly he had decided to do to express his gratitude and show his appreciation. The boy turned to the man next to him and told them to bring what he had prepared for her. He looked confident and excited about the upcoming surprise. Soon they saw a familiar silhouette, which the maid immediately recognized. It was a dress, most likely a banquet one, clearly indicating that some kind of event was being prepared. Basner, noticing her gaze, asked her not to feel uncomfortable, assuring her that this gesture was made sincerely, from the heart, and had no ulterior motives. The lady was grateful for such a gesture, but could not help but try to express her reluctance to accept such a gift, using only gestures, trying to refuse. But the boy, with determination in his voice, said he still had something to tell her. He expressed his gratitude, calling her his benefactor for what she had done for him. He explained that until recently, he had been confronted by a huge wall, which he felt like a heavy burden. This wall had weighed on him his entire life, holding him back from taking action and making decisions. This wall forced him to live in constant fear, avoid confrontation, and hide. But meeting her, Ruvia, changed everything, breaking down his inner barriers. His meeting with her became a turning point, a reason to face his past and finally confront what he had tried to hide for so long. And then, finally, he realized that all these years he had been pathetic, that he had been avoiding himself with reality, with what was preventing him from moving forward, with what needed to be overcome. But now he firmly declared that he was no longer going to run away. Whatever the outcome, he was ready to fight to the end, with the confidence and determination he had acquired. And all of this was made possible thanks to Ruvia. He felt that her help and support had been the turning point that radically changed his outlook on life. The maid was absolutely delighted. The lady, however, was somewhat perplexed. She didn't quite understand how this had happened, since her intentions had been much simpler. She had simply wanted to teach those rude people a lesson. The guy, noticing her confusion, explained that he'd been thinking long and hard about how to thank her for everything she'd done for him. He knew no gift could compare to what she'd given him. It would have been better if he had simply forgotten about that incident, but the guy continued to say that he had heard that she had set herself a high goal, despite her illness, and had gone against the Archduke to enter the academy. Currently, despite her high status, Ruvia is facing financial difficulties, as support for the duchy has been cut off. This poses serious problems for her. Because of this, people begin to joke and ironically discuss what outfit the princess will appear in, laughing at her position and appearance, without knowing the whole truth. However, one man knows who this woman truly is. He understands her virtues perfectly and cannot allow anyone to dare to humiliate her. He knows there's little he can do, but he decides to act with dignity. To help, at least a little, he prepares a magnificent dress for Ruvia, hoping she will accept it. Although this gesture is not enough, he will be greatly honored if she accepts the gift, because he sincerely wants to help and support her during this difficult time. Ruvia was lying on the bed in her room, and her maid, noticing the new dress, thought that it was really very beautiful and truly elegant. The dress looks very expensive. It probably costs at least 2,000, the maid thought, appreciating its high quality and chic appearance. She decided to ask the lady what she was going to do with this expensive gift, whether she would wear it or reject it. Ruvia considered this. The thought of declining this gift troubled her conscience, for it was sincere and given with a genuine desire to help. Moreover, Bosner hadn't mentioned which house he represented when he met her. This led her to believe he probably didn't belong to an aristocratic family. Ruvia knew she'd likely struggled to save up the money for the dress. After all, the kingdom of Carmen, where she'd brought part of her past life, was the central region of the country. In a sense, Ruvia had met a fellow countryman, although they didn't get along, as she often had assassins behind her, dispatched on orders. The maid watched her mistress with interest, trying to figure out who might be making fun of her. Outwardly, she appeared serious, but sometimes her reaction seemed quite unusual. Ruvia was certain that the very same girls who always stood by Princess Sofian were behind all these pranks. It was obvious to her, and there was no doubt about it. The maid insistently suggested that Ruvia wear this dress, go to the banquet, and impress all the guests. She believed this was the best way to prove her strength and beauty. However, Ruvia herself didn't share this enthusiasm. The banquet and all these tricks held little interest for her. She was much calmer than she might have appeared. Curious, Ruvia asked Marie when the banquet would take place. She wasn't aware of all the details, but she had always been interested in events. Marie replied that the banquet would be that evening, adding that from now on, the lady had better not eat anything. Food would be better saved for a more important event, the banquet. Ruvia asked, surprised, what she meant. Marie explained that there would be delicacies at the banquet, and if she did decide to eat, there would be plenty of treats. Ruvia decided it was a good idea to let everyone around her enjoy her presence. Afterward, she decided to rest, and Marie was happy to see her mistress in a good mood. At the party, all the guests expressed admiration for Princess Sophia, saying that she was incredibly beautiful and seemed to shine, illuminating the entire hall. Her appearance captivated everyone. Janet enthusiastically admitted that she was very envious. Sophian was so charming that it seemed as if she was the only important or interesting person at the banquet. The princess responded gratefully and remarked that even Janet's pink ponytails looked beautiful today. She always had a knack for spotting beautiful details that others might miss. Sophian always maintained the right tone in conversation, preferring refinement and sophistication in her communication. Her words always sounded like masterfully chosen works of art. In contrast, Ruvia was perceived as something low and unattractive. People, she felt, were trying to judge her by her appearance, but the truth was different. However, the girl couldn't forgive being insulted again. Princess Sophian and her servants had crossed the line once again, and Ruvia was ready to pay for it. Janet, feeling uneasy, quietly said that she hoped Lady Ruvia wouldn't show up today. She didn't want her presence to spoil the atmosphere of the evening. A silence fell over the room in response to her words. Everyone sensed that Janet regretted her words, realizing she had reminded everyone of Ruvia, who might have suddenly appeared. Janet was simply on edge, worried that Ruvia would actually show up and cause some trouble. Her mind raced with thoughts of the possible consequences. Princess Sophian calmly said there was no need to worry about Ruvia. She assured the girl that she had no business there, and she herself wondered if she would really come. Sophian had no idea what might happen. Even if Ruvia decided to come, she doubted anyone would meet her, since she wasn't expected. Everyone insisted that Ruvia would be left without company and would spend the evening alone, unable to find anyone to talk to and share time with. She would be alone, as always. However, there were those who considered her too poor to interact with others, and even hoped that someone would help her. But one woman objected, saying that they shouldn't approach her, as she might infect them with her recklessness. Sophian replied that even if everything really did happen as they said, there was no point in continuing the conversation. It was better to leave the discussion alone, as it was pointless and wouldn't lead to anything good. After all, they are all well-mannered ladies and should understand that such conversations have no place in civilized society. Of course, everyone should follow the rules of decency. After Sophian's words, the girls were completely delighted. They began to agree with the princess, adding that her beauty was not limited to her outer appearance, but also her inner soul. Incidentally, rumor has it that Princess Ruvia failed her entrance exams, which attracted attention. Her failure became a topic of discussion among students. Interestingly, all students' results were published except for Ruvia's. This decision was made on the director's personal orders, which surprised many. There's definitely something wrong with her results, and this behavior is causing discontent among the Academy's closed beta testing students. It's insulting to everyone who passed their exams with honors. Of course, we can't turn a blind eye to this, but no one knows the whole truth. So for now, it's worth simply observing the situation and not jumping to conclusions. However, Sophian also thinks that Ruvia might not be smart enough to enroll in the academy on her own, but something about this statement strikes her as dubious. In fact, Sophian is very worried about her, although the girls do not understand why the princess is so concerned about the fate of this girl, because she does not seem special to her. Princess Sophian noted that she was aware of Archduke Rusin's anger at Ruvia, and furthermore that her financial situation left much to be desired. All of this was alarming. Sophian asked if she had money to buy herself a dress for the upcoming banquet. She didn't want to show up in the same shabby dress she wore at the last event. If the princess appeared in that dress again, everyone would avoid her for the entire evening. Everyone already knew what it looked like and didn't want to approach her for fear of being offended by her appearance. Many could not understand which of them would want to approach her of their own free will, because even according to rumors, this dress became a symbol of her failure at the last banquet. Sophian suggested that Ruvia enjoy the banquet to the fullest and ignore the stares, as the evening would still be an important event. She should simply relax and enjoy herself. Suddenly, the mistress entered the room, and immediately a commotion and uproar erupted. All the girls turned their gazes towards her as her appearance could not go unnoticed at such a moment. Sophian was completely shocked when she saw Mistress Ruvia standing before her. She seemed completely transformed, and this left her with a mixture of surprise and bewilderment. Ruvia, sensing the gaze, asked the maid if there was something on her face, as her embarrassment was clearly visible. She couldn't understand what had attracted such attention. Marie replied that there was nothing on her face except incredible beauty, which attracted all eyes. Her words, though intended as a compliment, came as quite a surprise. Ruvia only sighed painfully at these words, as if tired of the endless praise. She could no longer bear to listen to these compliments, which, in her opinion, did not add to her joy. 2 hours before, the maid had informed her that the mistress must wait, as she seemed to be going to leave right now, but this was too hasty for an evening out. The lady couldn't understand why they were taking so long. If they didn't hurry, they would definitely be late, and she wanted to get everything done. This worried her, and she couldn't understand the dragging on. The maid explained that such banquets required careful preparation, as without it, the evening would not be as spectacular. She promised to give the mistress a stunning evening makeup. Even if it was the fourth prince, as soon as everyone saw her, they would immediately lose their heads with love and admiration, so she believed. The mistress knew that she had agreed to this in vain, because the maid took her preparation very seriously and turned out to be too attentive, which made her worry. Who would have thought her maid would be such a master of her craft? Her work was impeccable, and she clearly demonstrated her understanding of what it takes to be a true professional. Everyone turned their attention to her. The faces around her literally came to life, and everyone was ready to admire her face even more, which was undoubtedly too beautiful to go unnoticed. The mistress wanted to meet Basner and get out of here as quickly as possible, so she pointed the maid in the direction they should head. Time was pressing, and she didn't want to be late. The maid was surprised that her mistress had decided to go to the farthest place, but suddenly, one of the guys with whom she had recently fought approached them and offered to dance. There goes that rude fellow who bullied the fawn, she thought. She was surprised by his behavior and couldn't understand why he suddenly decided to ask her to dance. She was slightly surprised to see him. He looked embarrassed, as if he were experiencing some kind of setback or anxiety, which gave him a certain sincerity. She wondered why her friend was asking her to dance, and then came to the conclusion that perhaps he had a crush on her, which put her in an awkward position. The boy looked extremely embarrassed, and the lady didn't want him to worry so much. She decided to joke to lighten the mood and give him a chance to relax. She agreed to dance and said they could dance, which pleasantly surprised the guy. He obviously didn't expect her to agree so easily. The guy was incredibly happy with her consent. When they started dancing, his embarrassment was obvious, but it was important to him not to miss the chance to spend this moment with her. He moved awkwardly, like a wooden star, completely unlike a knight, though they usually have at least some training in dancing, but here it didn't feel that way. His manners left much to be desired. She'll have to adjust to him. She noticed him blushing with embarrassment, and it made her smile slightly because his awkwardness was so obvious that she felt almost uncomfortable. Everyone watched their dance, and it was noticeable that Princess Sophian couldn't hide her anger. She clearly disapproved of what was happening and couldn't hide her displeasure. It was a real nightmare, as Jonathan noted. He added that inner beauty is far more important than appearance, and this, in his opinion, was the key to true charm. Others also agreed with his opinion. They couldn't understand how the boys could fall for such vulgarity, since the dance, like the entire situation, was extremely unpleasant. She did not know how to dance at all. There was no charm in her movements, and this immediately revealed her low origin, which emphasized her lack of sophistication. It was often hinted in conversations that her mother was a commoner, and it was believed that if the princess had been trained properly, she would have moved completely differently, more gracefully. Sophian, watching everything unfold, remarked that she was very curious about who would be the next crazy person to ask her to dance. It would be awkward if he tripped again. And then a young man approached her. Everyone was surprised, unsure who it was. But one of the ladies finally said it was Basner, a second-year student in the Knight's faculty, a commoner from the Kingdom of Carmen. Princess Ruvia was a failure in their eyes, but she and Basner looked like a perfect couple, which only fueled the interest and curiosity of those around them. Everyone eagerly awaited what they would show. When they began to dance, it became a true spectacle. The dance was beautiful and elegant, every movement smooth and harmonious, captivating everyone's attention. The lady didn't expect the dance with Basner to be so unexpectedly magnificent. His movements were confident and graceful, a stark contrast to her initial expectations. He turned out to be truly good, and his dancing wasn't just high, it was truly outstanding, almost at the top of the class. She was amazed by his skill. Basner wondered what the lady was thinking when she looked into his eyes. He was intrigued by her thoughts and wanted to understand what was hidden behind her gaze as they danced. She smiled at him and replied that he danced very well. These words embarrassed him, and he, in turn, said that the same could be said about her. The guy said that this was his first dance with a lady, and he was amazed by her movements, which looked incredibly graceful and smooth, as if she was born for this. However, in reality, he felt a slight disappointment. He couldn't understand why the lady didn't share his excitement and didn't see anything special in it. He admitted that he'd dreamed of asking her out first, but it hadn't worked out that way. He wanted her to feel like this was an important moment for him, not for anyone else. She just smiled and asked curiously what the difference was, since it wasn't that important to her. She didn't consider it anything special. Eventually, they started dancing. The guy, a little embarrassed, asked if she would agree to another dance if he asked her again. The lady nodded, and the boy was amazed. He couldn't believe she had agreed, and he felt delight and hope growing within him. The lady smiled and confirmed her words. She truly enjoyed dancing with him. She savored the moment when the dancer performed so masterfully. Although she doubted she'd attend the next banquet, her dance with this guy left an unforgettable impression. Everyone around her was amazed by her grace and ease. No one could have imagined Princess Ruvia could move so gracefully. Her dance combined elegance, nobility, technique, and unparalleled beauty. The ladies whispered that dancing with a commoner was certainly Ruvia's style. Mule was certainly an aristocrat, but his reputation left much to be desired, and everyone knew it. Basner, of course, was a commoner, and many had no doubt that she would continue dancing with such people. This surprised no one who knew Ruvia. Meanwhile, Princess Sophian was clearly displeased. She believed Ruvia could never reach her level, and she couldn't hide her disdain. Sophian bitterly declared that she had no one to dance with except commoners, and next time, perhaps, her partner would be someone from the lower class. Many doubted anyone else would dare ask her out, but suddenly, unexpectedly, another man approached Ruvia and asked her to dance. Everyone was shocked when they saw who had approached. When the lady turned around, her face expressed amazement. It was so unexpected that she herself couldn't believe it. She didn't expect the crown prince himself to ask her to dance. Ruvia hoped he wouldn't do it publicly to avoid unnecessary gossip. The lady asked him again why they needed to dance. She was about to leave the room when he suddenly approached her with this proposal, surprising her with his decision. The prince replied that he had invited her only to dance. He saw no other reason, as they shared a special bond that he wanted to express through this dance. This cunning young man decided to impress the audience and perform a little magic trick at the banquet, making everything more intriguing than just an invitation to dance. However, the lady refused, and the prince, stunned, felt how all his self-confident mood disappeared. The lady said that she was lazy, and the prince tried to say that he was completely serious and did not understand what it meant that she was lazy. He has long understood what benefit he could gain by losing her, but she does not intend to get involved in a struggle for the throne or other political games. Unfortunately, he couldn't, and the prince didn't know what to do. She asked for forgiveness, but he is not so handsome that she would cross her line. She told him to dance with someone else, and then she heard laughter. The crown prince remarked that it sounded offensive, that he was not good looking. He thought he was okay, so he didn't ask her to dance. He didn't understand what to do. Having heard this, the last thing he wanted to do was give up. He smirked, and the lady looked at him with disdain. She didn't like spending time with him. The lady turned away and told him to try dancing with someone else. Then, the persistent prince decided to say that he heard that the lady had sold his gift. This suddenly made her wary, and he asked again if the princess knew that selling an imperial gift without permission was illegal. After all, it's an insult to the empire. This bastard got to it without any problem. She noticed that his excessive persistence was off-putting, so she sold the dress. The prince asked again what difference it made, after all. She said that he was very good. Perhaps, at least through persistence, he will be able to win her heart. The lady said she was the fiancée of his younger brother, the fourth prince, but the gentleman pointed out that they were not yet engaged, and the princess was most likely planning to break off the engagement. The lady was in complete shock. She did not understand how he knew about this. So he said that this lady should not refuse to dance with him, because she was so beautiful. Before that, he reported on her, and now he is threatening this crown prince is so funny that the lady doesn't even have any comments about it. He also says that it seemed to him that he had done nothing, but she decided to agree anyway. The prince asked her not to push him away, because he really wasn't that bad. The lady looked at him with indifference. It seems that all crown princes have a bad character. She tried to step on his foot every time, but each time he managed to move her away. The lady asked why he was dodging if he liked her so much. He decided to use protective magic.